Chapter 465. In today's Zhengxianmeng, Fuyunji could be said to be the most powerful hall, and this strength was not only in terms of combat power, but also in many other aspects. The most obvious one was the execution and efficiency of doing things. Overstaffed was basically the most appropriate description of the many halls in Zhengxianmeng. Many years of rule and ease had long made everyone lax. Anyway, the dirtiest, most tiring and most dangerous work was done by those idiots in Fuyunji. Wouldn't they be stupid if they didn't enjoy it? At the very most, they would just have to give in to the arrogant soldiers and valiant generals of the Floating Clouds Company. Furthermore, even if things got out of hand, everyone had their own backing. Was the Floating Clouds Company backed by perfected Lord Tianlan? I have one here too. In short, even if they quarreled, at the end of the day, it was for the world's righteousness, justice, the overall situation of the righteous path and other more important things. Everyone would be fine if they each took a step back, as long as they didn't suffer any immediate losses. Therefore, for many years, probably only Fuyunji, who had foolishly fought with the most dangerous enemy, the devil cult, could still maintain that kind of bloody and sharp aura. Take this time, true Lord Tianlan's plan to hold a disciple ceremony for example. He had announced this to the public 3 days ago, but if the task of organizing this disciple ceremony was given to any other hall in Zhengxianmeng, not to mention 3 days, even if you gave them a month, they might still mess it up. Everyone would kick each other's balls and quarrel with each other. In addition, each of them would secretly take some money from these missions. After about 3 months, the budget would increase by 5 or 6 times, and it would be done. Fuyunji was different. The group led by Xueying mobilized all the forces at hand and did their best. Then, everything was set up in 3 days, and according to true Lord Tianlan's instructions, they informed all the important people in Zhengxianmeng, big and small. After all, perfected Lord Tianlan's status was unquestionable. Moreover, his disciple recruitment this time round was akin to his direct line of descent, so he had to take him seriously. However, there were still some restraints in the process. If he really wanted to go all out, with perfected Lord Tianlan's identity, not only would he cause a stir in the Immortal City and the perfected Immortal Alliance, he would also cause a stir in the human cultivation world and countless sects and clans in the entire Divine Land. As long as he sent an invitation, they would probably all come. Of course, in this way, the time would be delayed for a long time. After all, China was so vast, and it would take time for people from remote places to come over, right? Xueying, who personally presided over and organized the apprenticeship ceremony, had even specifically consulted true Lord Tianlan about this matter. At first, true Lord Tianlan had hesitated because it seemed that this damn baldy really wanted to hold a world-shaking ceremony. However, in the end, this matter was indeed too troublesome. Putting aside everything else, once the invitations were sent out, by the time the ceremony began, there would at least be an extra 100,000 cultivators in the Immortal City, right? At that time, how would they be managed? How would they be settled? These were all headache-inducing problems. Therefore, after discussing with Xueying, perfected Lord Tianlan gave up this somewhat unrealistic idea and decided to only invite his friends from the Immortal Alliance who were currently in the Immortal City to attend the ceremony. On this day, the entire Celestial Dragon Mountain and the huge Immortal City seemed to have fallen into a carnival atmosphere. Everywhere in Zhengxianmeng was decorated with lanterns and streamers. The usually solemn Kunlun Hall was also filled with a joyous atmosphere. Since early in the morning, there had been many cultivators walking around. At the same time, as time passed, more and more cultivators from Zhengxianmeng arrived. Everyone called out to their friends with smiles on their faces. Each of them looked harmonious and humorous. At the same time, they laughed and guessed who the luckiest person in the world was. What was his identity and origin? Why had they never heard of this person before? Who would have thought that the best seat in Zhengxianmeng that everyone had been longing for decades would actually be taken by this stranger? There were too many such things to count. At least, most people knew nothing about this young man called Lu Chen who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Then, they felt jealousy and hatred towards him. Why didn't I encounter such a thing as a free lunch in the sky? That guy didn't do anything. He was unknown, but he gained the trust of a divine transformation stage perfected lord. Then, he rose to the top in one step. Was there any fairness in this world? Why wasn't that person me? These were the thoughts and voices that lingered in the minds of many people. As for the real identity and origin of Lu Chen, no one actually tried to get to the bottom of it. If a divine transformation stage perfected lord took a fancy to you and accepted you as a disciple, of course, there would be no problem. It was possible that their old man had lost his mind. However, as the strongest and youngest divine transformation stage perfected lord among the 6 perfected lords, although many people disliked him, no one had ever doubted his strength and judgment. Around noon, the most famous divine transformation stage perfected lords in Zhengxianmeng came leisurely on colorful clouds. Along the way, they were all high and mighty, looking down on the world, and looked extremely arrogant. Of course, they did have the capital to be arrogant. In the secular world, the people of Zhengxianmeng had always respected them and regarded them as half-human and half-god figures. Perfected Lord Tianlan personally came to the entrance of the main hall of Kunlun and bowed to these 5 old brothers. Everyone stood together. The 6 divine transformation stage perfected lords of Zhengxianmeng were awe-inspiring and powerful. Although they were just chatting, there was a large empty space around them. There was a faint sound of wind and thunder, which was awe-inspiring. After chatting for a while and receiving many sincere or fake congratulations, perfected Lord Tianlan, who was smiling, personally invited the 5 divine transformation stage perfected lords who had come to watch the ceremony and congratulate them into the main hall. After they went in, someone outside the house shouted, "The ceremony begins." The 6 perfected lords walked into the main hall and saw that both sides of the hall were already filled with people. There were 5 big chairs placed under the tall lotus throne in the center, and there were several rows of chairs behind it. The people sitting on the chairs were the real figures of Zhengxianmeng. They were under the 6 perfected lords and were the high-level cultivators who ruled over billions of lives in the vast land of the divine land. Further away were the cultivators of Zhengxianmeng who had almost come to watch the show. Most of them were standing, but there were also many good-looking figures among them. Obviously, there were also hidden dragons and crouching tigers. After a while, everyone sat down. Perfected Lord Tianlan returned to the lotus throne and his expression turned solemn. It could be said that he looked solemn and dignified, like a god. The people in the main hall immediately felt the powerful aura and quieted down, looking at him with some reverence. After a while, someone sang, "Lu Chen has come to see you." The sound of footsteps was heard. Like a gust of wind, everyone, including the divine transformation stage perfected lords, looked back and saw a figure walking in from outside with steady steps. It was Lu Chen. At that moment, countless eyes fell on him. Some were like fire, some were like fire, some were like frost, some were like snow, some were as gentle as water, and some were as cold as knives. Lu Chen seemed not to feel anything around him. He walked all the way to the lotus throne. Contrary to his usual unruly manner, his expression was solemn and respectful. He actually quietly and honestly knelt on the ground, giving the person on the lotus throne enough face. He clearly kowtowed a few times, and then said in a voice that everyone in the main hall could hear, "Disciple Lu Chen pays respect to master." After saying that, he lowered his body and closed his eyes slightly. When his face was close to the ground and he felt the coldness of the stones on the ground, for some reason, Lu Chen suddenly remembered that day many years ago, in a deserted and dirty corner, he also knelt in front of the same person and called out the 2 words, "Master." Suddenly, decades passed in the blink of an eye. The child of that year had grown up. And at this moment, was his heart as pious as it was back then? He closed his eyes, letting all the light disappear into the depths of his pupils. Chapter 466. Good, get up. Lord Tianlan, who was sitting on the lotus throne, smiled and looked at Lu Chen as he stood up. He nodded slightly, as if he was very satisfied with this disciple he had just accepted. What followed next was the usual procedure of acknowledging a master as a disciple. The only difference was that some people simply kowtowed 3 times. However, since Supreme Lord Tianlan had made such a big scene, he naturally had to do it from the beginning to the end. There was even someone who was singing at the side. Moreover, this person had a high status and was very eye-catching. It was the Floating Clouds Division's Hall Master, Xuang. During the ceremony, Lu Chen's eyes inadvertently swept across the crowd next to him. Other than the 5 prominent perfected gods in the front row, there was a group of people standing in the front row, and many of them were familiar faces. That was where the members of the Kunlun party were gathered. Lord Tianlan's current status in the Kunlun party was self-evident. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he was a leading figure. It was only because he did not want to be too troublesome. Otherwise, with his status, if he accepted a disciple, the Kunlun party's sect leader, Yuanying perfected persons, except those who were in seclusion, and those who had some status above the Jin Dan realm would have to come, even if they were thousands of miles away. At this moment, Lu Chen looked over and saw that many people from the Kunlun party had a strange expression on their faces. Standing at the front, other than Masato Kihara and a few other Yuanying perfected persons, the outstanding-looking Su Qingjun was also standing there, staring at Lu Chen with a somewhat complicated expression. Their eyes met for a moment, then Su Qingjun quietly looked away. And at the back of all the people, there was still one person standing there silently. He was young, handsome, in his prime, and talented. He was a proud son of heaven. Among his peers, he had high hopes from his elders and was respected by his peers. Other than Su Qingjun, there was almost no one else who could be compared to him. He was He had thought that the person in the limelight was him. For this, he had even betrayed his own master and worked hard for the person on the lotus throne, risking his life for his great cause. He had thought that everything was his. Until today, when he saw Lu Chen standing in the crowd. His eyes had been fixed on the person who had stolen everything from him. If his eyes could turn into a blade, he would have cut him into pieces and turned his bones into ashes. But the fact was that he could not get what he wanted, so he could only desperately suppress himself. His hatred, jealousy, and anger turned into sharp blades that could not hurt others, but were cutting himself. He did not even dare to raise his head to look at the lofty perfected Lord Tianlan, because he was afraid that a single glance would expose his hatred and alarm that person. In that case, what awaited him might be a tragic death. Why does such a person exist in this world? He thought fiercely in his heart. He stared at Lu Chen and unsurprisingly recognized him. He remembered that he was the one who had forced Lu Chen into the Dragon River in the land of chaos. But in just a few years, he had become perfected Lord Tianlan's direct disciple? Perhaps he would inherit his legacy in the future? And then steal everything from him? So all of you were lying to me. He slowly said in his heart, word by word. After the disciple acceptance ceremony was over, Xuang turned to perfected Lord Tianlan with a questioning look in her eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. He floated down from the lotus throne and landed beside Lu Chen. His expression was solemn, but he held Lu Chen's right hand and said loudly, "From today onwards, I will give you the Daoist name Tian and the name Ying." As he spoke, he looked around and pointed to the sky and then to the ground with a solemn expression. Heaven and earth Kunlun, passed down from generation to generation. Lu Chen knelt down in front of him again and kowtowed. One person in each generation, heaven will never be extinguished. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed and helped Lu Chen up. At this time, the divine transformation realm perfected lords who were watching the ceremony also stood up with a smile. The huge hall of Kunlun was filled with clamor. Countless gazes of envy, joy, and jealousy were looking at Lu Chen. Perfected Lord Tianlan pulled Lu Chen to the front row and introduced his disciple to the 5 high and mighty divine transformation realm perfected lords one by one. The 5 of them smiled and agreed. Then, they each took out a gift for Lu Chen. Lu Chen wore a smile and a respectful expression, looking like the most honest and humble young man. He greeted the 5 seniors with a smile and flattered them before accepting the gifts one by one. With the help of the divine transformation realm perfected lords, Lu Chen's current identity was completely different. Not only was he a disciple of perfected Lord Tianlan, he had also obtained the inheritance of the Heaven Dao name that perfected Lord Tianlan had announced to the world. Almost all the cultivators present knew what this meant. In the thousands of years of history of the Kunlun party, almost all the people who inherited this Dao name would become influential figures in the future. Out of 10, 70 to 80% of them would become the sect leader of the Kunlun party, which was much more important than the personal disciples of ordinary sections. Therefore, these divine transformation realm perfected lords should have also understood the reason behind this. Or perhaps they were giving face to perfected Lord Tianlan, who was currently at the peak of his power. The gifts they gave were truly extraordinary. Although they could not be said to be at the level of the extremely rare heavenly treasures, they were all exquisite and precious items that made people drool. One must know that they were basically giving them away for free. As the gifts appeared one after another and were accepted by Lu Chen without the slightest hesitation with a damned humble smile, the praises from the crowd could be said to come wave after wave, and the gazes of envy, jealousy, and hatred were like rolling waves. Of course, there was also he among them, but basically, there was only a bone-deep hatred left. After meeting the 5 divine transformation stage perfected cultivators, perfected Lord Tianlan actually went through the trouble of leading Lu Chen to the seats of the perfected cultivators 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 of the perfected cultivator alliance. This caused another uproar, and also let everyone see once again how much perfected Lord Tianlan doted on this disciple. In the future, if there were conflicts in daily life, they would probably give in to Lu Chen a little more. Well, by the way, don't think that you don't need to give a gift just because you are Yuanying realm perfected lord. Lu Chen still had a smile on his face, and his expression was gentle. When he was pulled around by his master perfected Lord Tianlan to greet the smiling seniors around him, his etiquette was simply impeccable. Except for a certain gap in the middle, when he seemed to maintain a smile while gently gritting his teeth, and said in a low voice that only perfected Lord Tianlan could hear, "I say, don't go too far. These people have never thought of giving you a gift, okay?" Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to have not heard him at all. With a smile on his face, he continued to pull Lu Chen forward as if he had not heard him. At the same time, he said in a low voice without batting an eyelid, "Are you stupid? I will only accept you as my disciple in my life. If I don't accept more, how can I face myself?" Lu Chen. Chapter 467. Lu Chen, come and greet perfected Long Tai. Perfected Lord Tianlan pulled Lu Chen to a square-faced and majestic Yuanying perfected master. He first smiled and nodded at perfected Long Tai. Perfected Long Tai didn't dare to be rude to him and hurriedly bowed with a smile. Perfected Lord Tianlan then turned to Lu Chen and said, "Perfected Long Tai is a famous figure in Zhengxiameng. In the Heavenly Law Hall, he is the most upright person and has always been respected by his peers." This was a praise from a famous soul formation perfected lord who could even be considered the number 1 person in Zhengxiameng. Even though perfected Long Tai wasn't on the same side as Fuyunji, he couldn't help but smile and thank him profusely. Lu Chen walked over obediently and greeted him with the etiquette of a junior. Then, he respectfully called perfected Lord Tianlan martial uncle. Perfected Long Tai was delighted at first and then shocked. He hurriedly shook his head and said, "Nephew, you can't do this. I don't dare to be on the same level as perfected Lord." In the past, I've always done the etiquette of a junior. How can I go overboard today? Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't care and laughed. He's a young man. It's only right for him to respect you as a senior. Today is a joyous day. Long Tai, you don't have to worry about it. Ha ha ha. Perfected Lord Tianlan's laughter was hearty and righteous. Instantly, it attracted a wave of flattery. They all said that Perfected Lord Tianlan was broad-minded and had an imposing appearance. Perfected Long Tai couldn't help but nod and laugh. Then, his gaze fell on Lu Chen. He nodded and said seriously, I see that nephew Lu Chen is talented and outstanding. You're truly a dragon among men. In the future, I will study hard and train hard under you. In time, I will definitely become a hero of my righteous Dao Immortal Alliance. As he spoke, he reached into his clothes and took out a jade bottle with a 5-petal red plum drawn on it. Under everyone's gaze, Perfected Long Tai's eyes flashed with a hint of pain. But then, his expression returned to normal. He stuffed the jade bottle into Lu Chen's hand and smiled. This is a superior-grade spirit pill called Red Plum. It's most effective for meridian and internal injuries. As long as your heart isn't completely shattered, taking this pill will save your life. It'll be a little more protection when you roam the pugilistic world. The crowd in Kunlun Palace was stirred. Many knew how precious the Red Plum spirit pill was, but almost no one expected it to be Long Tai Lan to be so generous. Earlier on, when Perfected Lord Tianlan brought Lu Chen to meet a few nascent soul-perfected beings, the gifts they gave were considered ordinary. Of course, this was only for perfected Yuanying. At least for ordinary cultivators, the gifts from those Yuanying perfected lords were already precious. Looking at the red plum spirit pill in his hand, Lu Chen was shocked. He looked a little uneasy and didn't dare to accept it directly. Instead, he turned to look at Perfected Lord Tian. However, what kind of person was Perfected Lord Tianlan? With one look, he could tell that the kid was gripping the jade bottle tightly and had no intention of letting go. Perfected Lord Tian coughed and clapped his hands. Lu Chen, why aren't you thanking Perfected Long Tai for his kindness? In the future, all of us will be in the true Immortal Alliance, and we will be one family. Today, we have formed a relationship, and there will be karma in the future. You must remember this in your heart. As he spoke, he even smiled and reached out to pat enlightened Long Tai's shoulder, nodding to him. Lu Chen nodded and bowed to Perfected Long Tai solemnly. Thank you, Uncle Master. A trace of joy flashed across Perfected Long Tai's eyes as he nodded with a smile. It was only then that the people at the side came to their senses and thought, so that's what's going on. Perfected Lord Tianlan is a powerful and prestigious Perfected Lord of the Soul Formation realm. If he were to give out an ordinary gift, wouldn't it be akin to slapping Perfected Lord Tianlan in the face if it was a slightly lower grade gift? I'm holding a disciple recruitment ceremony. On such an important and solemn occasion, you brought a broken thing over. Are you trying to disgust me? Are you looking down on me? Are you going to slap my face? Are you dissatisfied with a divine transformation stage perfected lord like me? Or do you want to go against me? F***CK. There was no way to think about what happened next. It was supposed to be a joyous day. They happily came to the palace of Kunlun to congratulate Perfected Lord Tian and form a bond with a divine transformation stage Perfected Lord. But if they gave too little gift, wouldn't the bond become an enemy? Who would have thought that Perfected Long Tai, who usually looked old-fashioned and upright, would think deeper than everyone else today? For a moment, everyone looked at Perfected Long Tai differently. Perfected Long Tai, on the other hand, revealed a pleased expression as he took a step back and stood among the crowd. After a while, many people present thought of another matter. It was the few nascent soul-perfected ones with relatively ordinary gifts that Perfected Lord Tianlan brought Lu Chen to see just now. Sure enough, at a glance, the 3 or 4 nascent soul stage Daoist masters all looked extremely ugly, their faces were green and white. Among them, there was an impatient one who was already glaring at Daoist Master Long Tai angrily, looking like he was gnashing his teeth. Perfected Long Tai didn't care about this at all. He didn't even bother to look at them. Was this a joke? That was an outstanding peak perfected lord. His influence was so great that no one in Zhengxiameng could compare to him. Instead of forming a bond, they would offend him. Go to hell. Compared to that, offending you Yuanying perfected lords is nothing. Anyway, everyone was in the Yuanying realm. Who's afraid of who? With Daoist Master Long Tai's good start, the situation immediately changed. Wherever perfected Lord Tian and Lu Chen went, there would be cheers and laughter. Come, Lu Chen, this is perfected Meng Shan, greetings, Martial Uncle Meng Shan. Ha, no need to be so courteous. Sigh, nephew Lu Chen has an excellent aptitude. Congratulations to perfected Lord for getting such a good disciple. This is the first time we meet. I have a treasure called Ice Crystal Stone. It came from a 10,000-year-old ice cap. It is a rare item, please accept it. Lu Chen, come over, greetings, perfected Huang Tan, greetings, Martial Uncle Huang Tan. Ha, nephew need not be so courteous. TSK, nephew Lu Chen is young and handsome. Now you are married. Young man, don't say a few words and I will be embarrassed. Come, this is the first time we meet. This King Wu hook that can cut through gold and jade is a greeting gift. Come, this is perfected Tong Shan, ha, this is perfected Yen Zhao, come quickly, Lu Chen, come and greet this person. She is not an ordinary person, she is the famous celestial Chui Wei, and this is perfected by Sha. In the end, the people of the Floating Clouds office were the ones who were smart. Shuang made a gesture without batting an eyelid. Old Ma, who was beside her, ran over like a wisp of smoke. He held an extremely large and solemn red wooden tray in his hand and began following Lu Chen and True Lord Tianlan step by step. Lu Chen took one and put another on the wooden plate. There was no other way. He couldn't just put it into the tree hole in front of everyone, right? Therefore, he could only trouble Old Ma to carry the plate. Furthermore, one plate could not fit all of them. After all, there were big and small treasures. After filling it up, Old Ma ran back and put it away. Then, he took another plate and ran over. For a moment, he attracted the attention of many people. Why did it seem like Fuyunji's preparations were very thorough? Chapter 468. Unknowingly, the atmosphere in the main hall of the Kunlun slowly became a little strange. Most of the people who could stand here today were cultivators with status or roots in Zhengxiameng. Since they had status in Zhengxiameng, they were also a group of elites in the vast land of Shenzhou. Most of the people who could reach such a position were smart people, and some things could naturally be seen by those who were observant. However, most of the people seemed to be unaware of this. Everyone was amiable and polite. Wherever perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen went, there was a sea of joy and flattery. Only the 5 big shots who were also perfected lords of the divine transformation realm behind them had a slightly different expression from the rest. Some frowned slightly, some smiled with slight disdain, and of course, there were also some who seemed to be smiling as if they could not help laughing. After walking around like this, perfected Lord Tianlan brought Lu Chen to meet a large number of Yuanying Zenrens. Old Ma, who was following behind, received gifts until his hands were sore, but he was unusually excited. This guy had probably never seen so many rare treasures in his life, and his eyes were almost dazzled. Seeing that there was only one last group of people left, when perfected Lord Tianlan led Lu Chen to that side, he did not stop in front of the few Yuanying Zenrens in front of the crowd this time. Instead, he nodded at them with a smile and walked forward. The people next to him were stunned, but after taking a closer look at the crowd, they came to their senses. It turned out that the people standing there were all people from the Kunlun party. It seemed that perfected Lord Tianlan was a little embarrassed to attack his own people after all. After seeing perfected Lord Tianlan's action, the few Yuanying Zenrins of the Kunlun party were obviously relieved and a smile appeared on their faces. After all, they were from the same sect as perfected Lord Tianlan. If perfected Lord Tianlan really brought Lu Chen to meet them, not only would they have to give him a greeting gift, but because of this relationship, they would most likely give him a better gift than the others. Seeing that things were as such, perfected Lord Tianlan was about to walk past the Zenrins of the Kunlun party with Lu Chen. Unexpectedly, at this moment, Lu Chen, who had been quietly following behind perfected Lord Tianlan and had never overstepped the rules for so long, suddenly turned around and actually left perfected Lord Tianlan behind. He took a few steps forward and bowed to one of the few Yuanying Zenrins of the Kunlun party. With a smile on his face, he said very politely and respectfully, "Greetings, Uncle Master." There was a sudden commotion in the crowd. Many gazes looked over curiously, including perfected Lord Tianlan who was walking in front, who also looked back in surprise. At the end of everyone's line of sight, the person who stood in front of Lu Chen with a stunned expression was Masato Kihara of the Kunlun party. In the crowd, Su Qingjun, who was originally standing behind Masato Kihara with a slightly complicated expression, suddenly saw Lu Chen like this. For a moment, she was also a little surprised and subconsciously took a step forward. Although Masato Kihara was stunned, she was after all a Zhenren of the Yuanying Zhenren who had cultivated for many years. She had both bearing and experience, so she quickly adjusted herself and laughed. She quickly reached out to help Lu Chen up and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, you can't do this. Usually, when I see your master in the same sect, I also greet him as a junior and call him Uncle Master. From now on, you and I can just treat each other as equals." Lu Chen smiled and nodded. Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was next to him, walked over. He did not seem to be angry, but found it a little funny. Perhaps he was thinking to himself, "Is this guy actually more cunning than me? He even dares to lay his hands on his own people." At the same time, he was also a little curious as to why this disciple of his did not look for anyone else but this Masato Kihara. One must know that in this hall today, the Uncle Master that Lu Chen called out was the most valuable. After half a day, who knew how many treasures he had swindled? Many people understood this logic. Of course, Masato Kihara could also see it. For a moment, his face was a little bitter and he laughed dryly. At this moment, he naturally recognized Lu Chen's appearance. Back then outside Su Qingjuan's cave abode, he had also come into contact with Lu Chen. Therefore, he leaned forward slightly and his expression did not change. However, he lowered his voice and said, "Little Lu, on this big day of yours, why are you staring at me instead of others?" Su Qingjun stood beside her master and heard this sentence clearly. She frowned slightly and looked at Lu Chen with some unfriendliness, as if there was a little anger. Lu Chen also lowered his head slightly and then said in a low voice, "Uncle Master, that year outside the Qingjun sect, you promised to give me something. You haven't given it to me yet." Apart from Su Qingjun, there was also perfected Lord Tianlan who heard this conversation. At this moment, he raised his brows slightly and looked as if he was going to scold Lu Chen and take him away. Suddenly, he steadied himself and then looked at Masato Kihara with a smile that was not a smile. His smile was full of playfulness. Sweat immediately dripped down Masato Kihara's face. Standing at the side, Su Qingjun was also stunned for a moment. Then, as if she thought of something, the corners of her mouth twitched and she seemed to almost laugh out loud. However, she immediately came to her senses and immediately held back her laughter. When she looked at Lu Chen again, she found that he was also looking at her, intentionally or unintentionally. Their gazes met in midair. Su Qingjun gently gritted her teeth, glared at him, and then turned her head away. After a moment, Masato Kihara coughed and laughed. "Brother Lu is too polite. Today is your big day. With a famous teacher like Uncle Master Tianlan, your future is boundless. You will definitely be the pillar of the new generation of our Kunlun party." As he said this, he paused for a moment and stretched out a hand to touch his body. The surrounding crowd immediately burst into laughter. It wasn't entirely out of mockery, it was just that this matter seemed rather amusing. However, it was obvious that Masato Kihara was a little unprepared for the current situation. Although he had said the polite words, when his hand touched his body, his movements were slow. It seemed that he had not thought about what gift to give. Outsiders might not understand, but most people in the Kunlun party knew that Masato Kihara was born in Tieji, and his resources were not as rich as the Kunlun party. It was only in recent years that he clung to the thigh of perfected Lord Tianlan that his life slowly got better. But it was also because of this that he could not show his timidity when perfected Lord Tianlan was looking at him with a faint smile. Just as he was cursing Lu Chen in his heart and was about to bleed with heartache, suddenly, Su Qingjun beside him took a step forward and put a small box in his hand. Masato Kihara was shocked. Before he could react, he heard Su Qingjun say calmly, "This is the famous tea, Little Crane. It is unique to the E family of Kunlun Mountain's tea-growing family. It can calm the mind and is quite effective for cultivating qi. There is only a small amount produced every year, and it is only given to those who are fated." After saying that, she did not look at Lu Chen. She lowered her eyes and took a step back, standing behind Masato Kihara again. "E family, Little Crane." The smile on Lu Chen's face suddenly disappeared. After a while, he suddenly sighed softly and muttered to himself in a low voice, "Are we fated?" He shook his head and his expression suddenly seemed a little bleak. He then took the tea from the startled Masato Kihara's hand, bowed to him solemnly, and turned to walk forward. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled slightly and also turned to leave. Behind him, Su Qingjuan's bright eyes glimmered with a trace of pain and gentleness. She quietly glanced at Lu Chen's back. Chapter 469. This clamorous and lively disciple acceptance ceremony that shook the entire Immortal City finally came to an end before dusk arrived. Everyone left with a satisfied and joyful smile, walking out of the majestic Kunlun Hall and dispersing in all directions. When night fell, the Kunlun Hall finally regained its silence. Looking out from the hall and through the door, one could see a bright moon slowly rising, radiating a bright and gentle light that shone on the mortal world. At this moment, there were only 2 people left in the huge hall. When there was no one around, perfected Lord Tianlan casually sat on the ground, gazing at the bright moon in the distant night sky with a deep gaze. Beside him, Lu Chen also sat quietly, but he did not look at the moonlight outside. Instead, he was staring at an unknown dark corner in the hall, lost in thought. Not far behind the 2 of them, under the white lotus throne, on the tall and wide wooden table, all kinds of rare treasures were piled up like a mountain, to the point that the table could no longer hold them all. They slid down like worthless sand and piled up around the table, forming a treasure mountain that could make most cultivators in the world go crazy with envy. However, the 2 of them did not seem to be among the majority of the cultivators, because from the beginning to the end, perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen did not look back at the treasure mountain. This silence lasted for a long time. Suddenly, at a certain moment, Lu Chen broke the silence and said, "Hey, let me ask you something." Perfected Lord Tianlan replied with a Lu Chen said, "Did you want to take me in as your disciple when you took me in and nurtured me when I was young?" Perfected Lord Tianlan retracted his gaze from the moonlight and turned to look at Lu Chen, saying, "No." Lu Chen asked, "Why?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, "What you wanted to do back then was too dangerous. Even I couldn't guarantee your safety. Moreover, it seemed that after you sneaked into the devil cult, you would most likely die. So, you see, I can't possibly place all my hopes on a person who can die at any time, right? Lu Chen sighed and said, in any case, today is the first day I formally acknowledged you as my master. You don't have to be so straightforward with your words. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled warmly and said, apart from being with you all these years, it's rare for me to be able to speak freely. I'll take this opportunity to say a few more words. I'm delighted to see you suffer. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said grumpily, you are a famous divine transformation stage perfected cultivator. Why are you acting like a resentful woman? Do you have to do this? Perfected Lord Tianlan burst into laughter and looked delighted. When Supreme Tianlan's laughter stopped, Lu Chen looked at him and said, well, no matter what, I've taken you as my master. What do you need me to do next? Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered as if he was curious. He looked at his disciple with a smile and said, that's strange. If other people were to become a disciple of a divine transformation stage perfected cultivator, needless to say, the first thing they would do would be to obtain various cultivation resources from their master and cultivate to their heart's content. It would take at least a few years, and at most a dozen years. If they don't improve their cultivation to the Jin Dan Yuanying realm, they would be too embarrassed to tell others that they are the disciple of a divine transformation stage perfected cultivator. Why is it that when it comes to you, you don't even think about cultivation and the first thing you want to do is to help me? Lu Chen's expression was indifferent and did not seem to be affected. He said, that's for others. The situation is different. You are not those other perfected cultivators, and I am not those people. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment and then nodded. He seemed to be a little emotional, but he did not dwell on this matter. Then, he asked calmly, then can I trust you completely, Tianing? Lu Chen sat where he was and didn't answer immediately. His expression was a little strange. He didn't know if it was because of the sudden call, or if it was because of the high and mighty person in front of him saying the word believe. After a long time, Lu Chen raised his head and met Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze. He nodded and said calmly, sure. He said calmly, you can trust me. The Kunlun party has dispatched many people recently. Almost all of them have arrived at Immortal City. In the quiet hall of Kunlun, Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen sat side by side. Their voices were so soft that only the two of them could hear them. This group of people includes the other experts of the Kunlun party. Together with Fuyunji, they are the two strongest forces under me. If I want to do something big, I must integrate these two forces. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen and said, but it is not that easy. Although both sides listen to me, it will be troublesome to integrate them. Shuang is very capable, but the Kunlun party is very biased and may not be willing to submit to her. So I need someone to mediate between them, and this person is none other than you. Lu Chen nodded silently. He had no objections to this. Regardless of anything else, he was the only disciple and successor of Perfected Lord Tianlan. This was enough for the experts of the Kunlun party to acknowledge him. Moreover, he had been in the shadow of Fuyunji for at least 20 years. He was very familiar with Fuyunji. Therefore, Lu Chen did not reject this. He nodded and said, okay, I will do my best. When Perfected Lord Tianlan saw that he promised so readily, a hint of gratification flashed across his face. He nodded and said, don't worry, when it's time to support you, I'll definitely do so. Also, I won't treat you badly. At the very least, I'll let you have the strength to fight against a nascent soul-perfected master. Lu Chen smiled and suddenly asked, can I trust you? Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned. Of course. Why do you suddenly ask this? Lu Chen looked into his eyes and said, then you said you wanted to do something big. What is it? Perfected Lord Tianlan said without hesitation, you know me. For so many years, my top priority has been to completely annihilate the devil cult. Therefore, your next task is to mediate between the two parties. You will command and pursue the remaining members of the devil cult and try to completely destroy this tumor. Lu Chen nodded and said, I understand. What else? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him for a while and suddenly smiled. What else? What are you referring to? Lu Chen did not smile. He only looked at him quietly. The bright moon outside the hall finally rose into the night sky. The shadows on the ground gradually became shorter and blurred. The mountain of treasures behind them also quietly disappeared into the darkness. The surrounding was silent. The smile on perfected Lord Tianlan's face gradually disappeared. He looked at Lu Chen indifferently. His gaze gradually turned from gentle to deep and boundless, like the ocean with faint waves rising and falling. Why do you ask me this? When perfected Lord Tianlan spoke again, his voice was still deep and thick. However, there seemed to be a hint of thunder in it. Chapter 470. The hall was silent for a long time until Lu Chen's voice rang out, I've been in the devil cult for too long and I know them better than anyone else. Although the devil cult has a great reputation and is very ferocious, and there are still some demonic remnants appearing from time to time, but after the Battle of the Desolate Valley more than 10 years ago, they have more or less collapsed. Collapsed? But don't forget that Elder Ghost is still on the run. Even though we have annihilated their lair in the Immortal City underground palace a few days ago, he still escaped. Perfected Lord Tianlan asked. Lu Chen said indifferently, he alone is useless. In history, the devil cult had countless even more outstanding geniuses, but in the end, they still inevitably weakened. This is not the key point. Oh, then what is the key point? Tell me. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be interested, and his gaze became calmer. There was even a hint of admiration in his eyes. These complicated and intertwined emotions made him look like a terrifying dragon that was constantly changing its expression. He was hard to fathom. Lu Chen was probably the only person in this world who could speak bluntly in front of this dragon. Or perhaps it was because he strangely maintained an inexplicable calmness. Foundation, their foundation has been destroyed. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered, what foundation? People. Lu Chen said calmly, the key to the devil cult spreading its teachings and absorbing new blood to expand and strengthen is that they need many new people, which is the countless ordinary people in the world. As long as there are people who believe in their nonsense, then no matter what kind of setbacks the devil cult encounters, there will be a day where they will rise again. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded, indeed. In the past, there were some peerless geniuses in the world's righteous path who almost annihilated the devil cult. But as time passed, these evildoers could always rise again. Since the devil cult is so difficult to destroy, why are you so sure now? Because there has never been a Xianxia before. Lu Chen looked at him and said, in the past, no matter how powerful the geniuses of the righteous path were, they were just people who defied the natural order. At most, they had the power of a sect or sect. But now, Xianxia controls the cultivation world and his influence covers the whole world. Almost everyone is under the control of the Immortal Alliance. As time goes by, everyone will hear what Xianxia has announced, they will know that the nonsense of the devil cult cannot be trusted, and it will be harder for them to recruit new blood. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed. Lu Chen sighed and said, so what if there's Elder Gui? They're still facing a dead end in the end. There's no way out. We're destined to perish. Perfected Lord Tianlan patted his knee gently, looking somewhat relieved. Thank you for your auspicious words. I hope so. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, this is the general trend and it won't change anymore. It's just that many people don't understand the devil cult well, so they haven't reacted yet. He raised his head and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. However, you're different. Just like me, you've been dealing with this bunch of monster incarnates for decades. I'm sure you'll be able to understand what I can see as well. So I find it strange that the devil cult is just a facade now. You don't need to mobilize a large number of experts from the Kunlun party to help at all. Just the power of Fuyunji alone is enough to destroy them. Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a moment and said, "What you said makes some sense." Lu Chen said, "So other than the devil cult, what else do you want to do?" At this moment, his expression was unusually serious. He frowned and said, "I once infiltrated the devil cult and risked my life for you. I helped you do things and risked my life for you. This is nothing. But I want to know what exactly you want to do." When Perfected Lord Tianlan heard the first sentence, his expression was still a little uncertain. However, when he heard the words of risking his life, his body trembled slightly, as if his heart had been touched. His gaze slowly turned gentle. After a while, he waved his hand lightly. Lu Chen immediately stood up and walked to his side with light footsteps. He then squatted down quietly. Perfected Lord Tianlan started to whisper in his ear. His voice was so low that only Lu Chen could hear it. He listened quietly and remained expressionless from the beginning to the end. The moonlight outside the hall finally moved out of this place, leaving behind complete darkness that was as deep as the sea. Since the birth of Xianxia, there was probably no one like Lu Chen, who suddenly rose to the sky in one night. From an unknown person, he suddenly rose to the clouds and became an influential person with great power. Of course, this power came from the huge backing of Perfected Lord Tianlan. But it was also because of Perfected Lord Tianlan's strong and determined attitude that he directly gave Lu Chen incredible power. It showed that he valued this disciple very much and was determined to cultivate him with all his strength. In fact, Lu Chen became the leader of the experts dispatched from the Kunlun party. He was also responsible for negotiating with Shuang, the famous hall master of Fuyunji, about the arrangement of the two parties' forces. At the same time, he also began to intervene in everything related to the devil cult. He could ask about anything related to the devil cult. These two appointments alone were enough to make Lu Chen one of the most popular upstarts in Xianxia. At the same time, he also controlled an unimaginably huge amount of resources in Xianxia. No one dared to take him lightly. Because now, whenever Lu Chen went out and introduced himself, he would say with great emotion, "I am Lu Chen, Daoist name Tianing." What? You don't care about Tianing? Then can you please go and talk to Perfected Lord Tianlan? There were too many smart people in Xianxia. They had sharp eyes and could see the situation clearly. Everyone could see that Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was the most powerful person in Xianxia, probably really wanted to cultivate his new disciple this time. As for the other big shots under his command who had already been famous for many years, Thousand Lantern Immortal was far away in Kunlun as the sect leader Immortal and was out of his reach. Shuang was in charge of Fuyunji and had great power. However, she had suffered a heavy setback from the devil cult a few days ago. The outside world was saying that Perfected Lord Tianlan was dissatisfied with her. Besides, you are just a subordinate. How can you be compared with Lu Chen, a direct disciple with an inherited Daoist name? Perhaps Shuang herself had also recognized this reality. So when Lu Chen came to her and asked for the dozen devil cult captives he had captured in the underground palace, Shuang agreed without hesitation, even though it was Fuyunji's biggest responsibility to interrogate and deal with the devil cult for the past few decades. Her straightforwardness even surprised Lu Chen a little, but Lu Chen did not care too much. In fact, he just came to Fuyunji for a trip. For many years, the prison of Fuyunji had been the safest place to imprison dangerous members of the devil cult. For so many years, no one had ever escaped, so Lu Chen did not want to cause trouble. Outside the prison of Fuyunji, while waiting for those people in front to go through the complicated and tedious procedures to open the door, Lu Chen looked back and saw a man and a woman following behind him. The man was still Old Ma, but the woman was not White Lotus who had been with them for the past few days. Instead, it was Su Qingjun. At this moment, Su Qingjun did not have much of an expression on her face, but when she occasionally looked at Lu Chen, her eyes were a little complicated. She probably grew up in a quiet and peaceful environment of an aristocratic family and had never seen a man like him who insisted on using power to transfer her here. However, at this time, Lu Chen did not look at her. Instead, he frowned slightly, as if remembering something. He asked Old Ma in a low voice, "Where is White Lotus? Why haven't I seen her recently?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "I don't know either. It seems that since that day at Horse Washing Bridge, she has been hiding from us and refused to come over." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "Is she angry?" Chapter 471. Why is she angry? The one who asked this question was Su Qingjun, who had been standing silently at the side. She was from the Kunlun party and had met White Lotus before. Although she had just arrived in Immortal City and did not know much about the entanglement between White Lotus, Lu Chen, and Old Ma in the past, she heard that Lu Chen and Old Ma's words were a little strange. She was also a smart and sensitive woman, so she asked directly. Lu Chen was stunned and did not know what to say for a moment. He looked at Old Ma. Old Ma also shrugged and turned his head, obviously not wanting to answer this question. Lu Chen was a little helpless. After thinking for a moment, he whispered to Su Qingjun, "Old Ma and I guessed it privately. She probably thought that she would become the bald head's disciple." Old Ma stood at the side and listened. Suddenly, his heart moved slightly, and he glanced at Lu Chen. In the words just now, it seemed inconspicuous, but Old Ma and Lu Chen had been together for many years, so he still heard something strange in it. For many years, Lu Chen had called perfected Lord Tianlan "damn bald head" behind his back, but now, the word "die" was quietly missing. Su Qingjun naturally did not notice this, but she was still surprised by Lu Chen's words. She said in astonishment, "Wasn't White Lotus the disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan? Why would she think of?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Not everyone thinks the same as you." With that, he roughly told Su Qingjun about what had happened to White Lotus these days. After listening, Su Qingjun was silent at first, and then she shook her head gently with some pity on her face. She said, "It seems that White Lotus is a little pitiful. At a young age, her master unfortunately passed away before she succeeded in her cultivation. Now she has been taken to stay with Martial Granduncle Tianlan. Maybe she just wants to find someone to rely on." Pitiful? Lu Chen seemed to disagree with Su Qingjun's comment. He said, "That little girl is much more powerful than you think. Don't underestimate her, and don't sympathize with her. Otherwise, you will suffer a big loss in the future." Su Qingjun glanced at Lu Chen with slight surprise and said, "What's wrong with you? You're actually so harsh to a little girl?" Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. It was no wonder that Su Qingjun would behave like this. Indeed, when White Lotus was on Kunlun Mountain in the past, except in front of him, she would show a fierce side. In front of others, she was quiet and peaceful. It seemed that she had really deceived a lot of people. At this time, the door of the prison in front of them opened. Lu Chen did not want to continue on this topic, so he greeted them and walked inside. Su Qingjun seemed to be a little concerned about the relationship between Lu Chen and White Lotus. It seemed that she wanted to say something more. When she took a few steps forward, she suddenly saw Lu Chen turn back and suddenly smile at her. His smile was a little strange. Su Qingjun was a little surprised and said, "Why do you look at me like this?" Lu Chen said with a smile, "I thought of a very funny thing. The seniority between us is like a mess. When we were on Kunlun Mountain, didn't you accept me as a registered disciple? Now here, your master, Masato Kihara, has to call Tianlan martial uncle. Then you will become a junior to me, won't you?" Su Qingjun thought it was true. She snorted and walked forward grumpily, saying, "Don't expect me to call you martial uncle. Interrupted by him, Su Qingjun forgot what she wanted to ask White Lotus. As for Lu Chen, he smiled and walked into the dark cell with her. Most of the cells in the world were dark and depressing because they were a place to imprison people and make them lose their freedom. It was a place where countless pains were created. Almost no one liked to stay here. No matter the prisoners or the people who were themselves free. Su Qingjun didn't like this kind of place either, so she was surprised and puzzled that Lu Chen specifically asked her to come here. But she was not a rebellious person. In fact, for so many years, although she carried the name of a genius, she basically didn't do anything too rebellious, whether in her family or in her sect. So she still came here. She was a good daughter in the eyes of everyone in her family. She was a genius disciple in the eyes of her master. Her cultivation was brave and vigorous. It seemed that her life would be smooth sailing according to people's expectations, and she might not even encounter a few big storms. At least so far, Su Qingjuan's life was almost like this. The reason why it was more or less the same was because a few years ago, she had also encountered a huge accident and witnessed the death of her younger brother. The past became a knife, hidden in everyone's hearts. From time to time, when they thought of it, they would be cut, which made people feel a little sad. Lu Chen led Su Qingjun forward and from time to time introduced the situation in a low voice to her. As for old Ma, he had been following behind them, his eyes vigilantly looking at the cells around them. This prison was specially set up by the Fuyun office to imprison the evildoers of the devil cult. After so many years of blood feud, of course the Fuyun office would not be courteous to these mortal enemies. Therefore, this prison was very dirty, very messy, very dark, and very smelly. It was very much like the dark place in those stories where all the evildoers gathered. It was very disgusting. The prison cells on both sides of the road, other than the hard and wide stone walls, were almost all surrounded by iron bars as thick as a wrist. Most of the prisoners locked up here, which were the evil cult's evil people and captives, all looked lifeless. They hid in the dark corners of the cells, as if they were afraid of the light. Occasionally they would look with hatred, or with completely numb eyes at the figures who had just passed by, sitting motionless in the dark. The surroundings were quiet, but this dark prison looked unusually scary. There was even a faint feeling of deprivation of humanity, making people tremble with fear and especially disgusted. Both Lu Chen and Old Ma were indifferent to the uncomfortable situation in this prison. They indifferently walked forward, as if they did not feel anything around them. Only Su Qingjuan's expression turned uglier as she walked, especially when she gradually went deeper into the prison. Slowly she saw more and more terrible mirror images. Her face started to turn pale. In the cells in the depths of the prison, the prisoners locked up were obviously of a higher status, and their cultivation was also stronger. However, more countermeasures had also appeared. Some were chained up, some wore heavy shackles, and some were covered in blood. There were obvious signs of torture, and they looked very miserable. Most of the prisoners here looked very weak. They were groaning in pain, gasping for breath, as if they were the weak and tiny souls in this demonic prison. As they continued to walk forward, when they were about to reach the deepest part of the prison, Su Qingjun suddenly stopped. Her face turned abnormally pale, even bloodless. Because here, in the cell that she had just passed, she inadvertently saw a prisoner in an even more miserable state. It was a man with missing limbs. This man's right arm and left arm were cut off by sharp blades, his left leg seemed to be a little limp, his face covered with weeds like a beard. When Lu Chen and the others walked over, this man seemed to be unaware of what was happening outside. He was just trying to drink water. There was a broken bowl on the ground, there was some dirty water in it. He knelt on the ground and stretched his neck, like a dog trying to put his face into the broken bowl to drink. Su Qingjun seemed to be unable to bear it anymore. She suddenly grabbed Lu Chen, her face pale, pointing at the man in the cell. Even her voice was slightly trembling as she asked, this man, what did he do wrong, to be treated like this? Chapter 472. The passage of the prison immediately quietened down. Not only Lu Chen and Old Ma's side, but also the prison guards who were leading the way and following behind. One must know that the most important prisoners in Fuyunji were imprisoned here. Every one of them was an evildoer of the devil cult, a great enemy with a blood feud. Of course, Fuyunji attached great importance to them. Therefore, even though Lu Chen's status was different now, the prison guards here could not really let the three of them walk in as they pleased. There were quite a number of guards accompanying them, but Lu Chen's identity as the disciple of Supreme Tianlan was still powerful, so everyone gave him some face and walked a little further away. At this moment, when they suddenly heard Su Qingjun say such words, and her tone was urgent, there seemed to be some indignation. Before Lu Chen and Old Ma could react, several cold gazes swept over them. Lu Chen frowned slightly and said, "Those are the evildoers of the devil cult." Of course, those who were imprisoned in this prison were the remaining evildoers of the devil cult who had been fighting with Fuyunji for decades. Su Qingjun also knew this in her heart, but there was still some reluctance and anger in her expression. But as intelligent as she was, she quickly felt that the surrounding prison guards were looking at them with unfriendly gazes. Su Qingjun gritted her teeth and seemed to be a little hesitant, but in the end, she could not help but say, "I know they are evildoers of the devil cult. I won't say anything if you kill them, but such humiliation and torture, isn't it too much?" Lu Chen nodded, and then suddenly waved to one of the prison guards who was standing a little further behind. That person quickly walked over, bowed to Lu Chen and said, "Young master, what's the matter?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment. He probably didn't expect the guard to call him young master. However, this wasn't the time to worry about this. In any case, it was probably because he didn't have a public position yet, so it wasn't appropriate for others to call him that. Therefore, he didn't say much and just asked, "I haven't asked for your name yet." The prison guard said, "I dare not. My surname is Chen, and my name is Gai." Lu Chen nodded, and then said to him calmly, "Can you tell this senior sister of the Kunlun party about the prisoner's situation?" Chen Gai straightened up, glanced at Lu Chen, and then turned to Su Qingjun, expressionlessly pointed to the prisoner in the prison, and said, "This person is called Shang Fei, originally an altar master of the devil cult in the Western land. He has done many evil deeds and committed many bloody crimes. We caught him 2 years ago and locked him up here." At this time, Old Ma, who was standing at the side, suddenly made a sound of surprise, but no one noticed him. Only Lu Chen glanced at him out of the corner of his eye, and found that Old Ma was looking at the mutilated devil cult prisoner through the iron bars. Lu Chen did not care about him, and quickly continued to ask Chen Gai, "What's the matter with the injuries on his body?" Chen Gai said, "Some of them are injuries from when we first arrested him, and some are from when we interrogated him." A trace of anger flashed across Su Qingjun's face, and she said, "We, the Zhengxianmeng, are the leaders of the world's righteous faction, how can we?" Before she could finish her words, several gazes from the side, including Chen Gai's, became a little unhappy. Lu Chen shook his head, and after a moment of silence, he said to Chen Gai, "This Shiji Su, she probably did not know about those things before, so please forgive her." Chen Gai nodded slowly, and his expression softened a little. At the same time, he seemed to feel that the atmosphere here was inexplicably tense, and waved to the surrounding people. Those cold gazes immediately left, and everyone seemed to be relieved. Lu Chen said again, "How about this, can I trouble you to tell Shiji Su what this person has done?" Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, and her heart skipped a beat. She had a faint feeling that something was not right. Chen Gai, who was in front, did not hesitate too much. After nodding slightly to Lu Chen, he said, "This Shang Fei is the altar master of the devil cult. He looks gentle on the surface, but in fact, he is an extremely violent demon. The number of people killed by him adds up to at least 100, and as for the murders committed by the devil cult demons under his command, it is innumerable. Moreover, this person is vicious by nature. He often tortured his captives, and even skinned them. Several of our brothers in Fuyunji died in his hands. Su Qingjuan's face gradually turned pale. At the end of the story, Chen Gai turned around, looked at her, and said, "Miss Su, you are the proud daughter of a famous sect, so you probably don't understand these dirty and disgusting things. But in this place, these people deserve it. You don't have to plead for them." Lu Chen walked over from the side, looked at Su Qingjuan's unusually ugly face, and did not say anything. He only whispered a few words in Chen Gai's ear. Chen Gai turned back to look at him, and then nodded. It seemed that he agreed. Lu Chen cupped his hands to show his gratitude. Then, they continued to walk forward. Chen Gai seemed to be a chatterbox, and walked in front of everyone. Every time they passed by a cell, he would speak about the identity and origin of the prisoner, and then introduce the various evil deeds of the person. Although his tone was very calm when he spoke, but the words between the lines made people tremble with fear. The darkest side of this world, those unimaginable and indescribable evil and terrible horrors, slowly surfaced. The gloomy, dirty and smelly prison seemed to have turned into a terrifying hell. Hundreds of ghosts walked in the night, horrible to look at. There were no images, and there were no screams and whimpers, but just imagining the images seemed to be suffocating. Su Qingjuan's hands slowly clenched, and her footsteps became heavier and heavier. Old Ma looked worriedly at the girl's pale face, hesitantly gave a look to Lu Chen. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, walked to Chen Gai's side, gently patted his shoulder, and then whispered a word of thanks. Chen Gai also nodded to Lu Chen, and then walked back and stood together with his other guards. Lu Chen walked to where she was, and stood with Su Qingjun, her face pale and breathing rapidly. He looked at the girl's eyes that seemed to suddenly be in a daze, and whispered, "Now you know what kind of lunatics we are going to face." Su Qingjun closed her eyes in pain, and after a while, softly said, "Why did you bring me here, and tell me all these?" Lu Chen said, "I am too lazy to meddle in other people's business, but you may have fought with people before, but you definitely have not really come into contact with these lunatics. I called you over today, to let you see this place, is to let you at least be prepared, although the evil sect is weak now, and their strength is not what it used to be, but if there is a fight in the future, you must not have any kind thoughts of leniency." He stared at Su Qingjun, said, "I have seen with my own eyes, some good faction cultivators gained the upper hand in the battle with the evil sect, but in the end they were soft-hearted and not ruthless enough, and were suddenly overturned and lost their lives." After a pause, the corner of his mouth seemed to twitch slightly. Among them, there were also some beautiful girls, because of this, fell into the hands of the evil sect. Su Qingjun was startled, looked at Lu Chen's ugly face, and couldn't help but asked, "What happened to them?" Lu Chen silently looked at Su Qingjun. For some reason, Su Qingjun at this time suddenly did not dare to look directly at this man's eyes. Her heart started to beat faster, as if she felt something. After a while, Lu Chen indifferently said, "Believe me, you don't want to know about those things." After speaking, he turned and continued to walk deeper into the prison. Ahead seemed to be reaching the end, which was also the last and most important prison cells. But at this moment, suddenly, Su Qingjun grabbed his hand. Her grip was so strong that even Lu Chen felt a trace of pain. Su Qingjun's face right now looked a little scary, so pale that it was frightening. Without a trace of blood, her eyes stared at Lu Chen's eyes, as if there was a ball of fire burning. After a moment, she opened her mouth, her voice low, word by word said, "Why are you so clear? Don't tell me you saw it with your own eyes at that time." Once the words were said, the inside and outside of the prison, suddenly a dead silence. Everyone's eyes, including those prison guards, even those sneaky cold eyes in the dark corners of the prison cells, all fell on Lu Chen. That gaze fell on him, as sharp and cold as a knife. Just like for so many years, the cruel pain that Lu Chen had to bear. Chapter 473. Lu Chen stood there, enduring the strange stares from the surrounding people, silent and did not speak a word. He looked at Su Qingjuan's pale face, her eyes although angry but still clear, like a mirror that had never been tainted by dust. Right and wrong? Right and wrong? Or perhaps only innocence, a pure heart untainted by dust. Was it because someone had once opened his arms in the darkness, used his chest and body to resist the raging tide that filled the sky? But, everything that he had done in the past, was it really all right? Those choices, were there any selfishness, were there any fears, was it really worth it? This was not what Lu Chen had imagined. Today he had specially brought Su Qingjun here. It was to let her have a clearer understanding of the evil sect, to let this woman who had a warm memory with him, in the future possible battles and killings, have a higher chance of survival and safety. He did not want to see anything happen to her. Lu Chen opened his mouth, seemed to want to say something, but the next moment, he still maintained his silence. Perhaps even he himself did not know what to say. Su Qingjun's beautiful face, from the initial pale, started to show surprise. She was stunned by Lu Chen's silence and then gradually turned into disappointment. Her emotions were so obvious that everyone could see it. She gently shook her head, looked at Lu Chen, and finally softly said, "I didn't expect you to be this kind of person." Her voice suddenly rose, her expression agitated and angry. She stared at the silent Lu Chen, like staring at a sinner. "Don't tell me you have really seen that kind of thing happen with your own eyes? Right before your eyes, you did not do anything, watched that woman being." She did not continue her words. Perhaps she had never really seen that cruel scene, or perhaps she was too kind-hearted to say those malicious words, but just by imagining, right now it seemed to be enough to make the surrounding people's gazes turn into sharp whips, nailing that silent man on the invisible wooden frame, whipping him countless times. Covered with scars. Covered with cuts and bruises. That wooden frame was called justice. Also called morality. Su Qingjun suddenly turned around and walked away with large strides. She resolutely and angrily left this dark, dirty, and smelly prison. She didn't want to stay in this disgusting place for even a moment. The prison guards behind her subconsciously opened up a path as they watched the woman leave. They looked at each other and frowned slightly. Finally, their gazes landed on Lu Chen. No one spoke, but their gazes didn't seem friendly either. Perhaps in that silence, there was disdain, contempt, hidden anger, and silent condemnation. The situation had suddenly changed in the blink of an eye, catching everyone off guard. Even the usually calm and composed Lu Chen seemed to be at a loss at this moment. Fortunately, at this moment, a figure suddenly walked forward and blocked in front of Lu Chen. Then, he laughed like a fool. "Ha ha ha, what's wrong with everyone? We are here to do something today, why do you all look so lifeless, ha 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 ha." Old Ma smiled and turned around. He patted Lu Chen's shoulder and said, "Let's go, it's just in front." Lu Chen glanced at him, slowly turned around and walked forward with Old Ma. After walking for about 10 steps, they arrived outside the last prison cell. There was a pillar in the prison cell, and on it was a prisoner with disheveled hair tied tightly with iron chains. There were many wounds and bloodstains all over his body. His head was drooping and he looked like he was unconscious. Looking at his face through the messy hair, it was the evil faction sorcerer, Chen He. Old Ma waved to the guards behind him and said, "Open the door, we want to interrogate this person." Accompanied by the clanking of the iron locks, the heavy iron door opened. Lu Chen and Old Ma walked in while the rest of the guards stayed outside. Lu Chen hadn't spoken a single word since the beginning. Even when he walked up to the prisoner, his expression still seemed to be a little dazed. Old Ma looked at him worriedly and looked behind him. Seeing that the prison guard seemed to have a tacit understanding to stand further away, he then heaved a sigh of relief. He walked to Lu Chen's side, lowered his voice and said softly, "I say, are you all right?" Lu Chen slowly shook his head, glanced at the unconscious Chen He and suddenly said, "Today I brought Su Qingjun over. I originally thought that after telling her about the evil faction's vicious methods, she would be on her guard. Finally, when we interrogate this person about Elder Ghost's whereabouts, maybe I will use some of the evil faction's cruel methods to make her understand more deeply." Old Ma gave a wry smile and said, "You really put in a lot of effort. Unfortunately this matter seems to be messed up." Lu Chen silently nodded and said, "Yes." Old Ma sighed and said, "Actually a girl like Miss Su, since young, she grew up in aristocratic families and famous sects, what she sees, knows and thinks, is different from us, it is really too normal, you. Let's go." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted his words. Old Ma was taken aback and said, "Not interrogating anymore?" Lu Chen indifferently said, "His injuries are so serious, and those people in Fuyunji's methods, how can they be worse than the evil faction? Till now they have not gotten anything out of him, I reckon I also have no way to pry open his mouth." After speaking, he turned and walked out. Old Ma hurriedly followed. Those prison guards standing outside were shocked, came up and asked, "Both sirs, are you not interrogating the prisoner anymore?" Lu Chen silently walked forward and did not answer. Old Ma gave a dry laugh, pointed to the unconscious Chen He in the cell and said, "That prisoner is still unconscious, and I have taken a look at his injuries, it is really very serious, he cannot withstand the heavy punishment, it will be very difficult to get anything out of him. 2 days later, we will come again in 2 days." The few guards looked at each other, contempt flashed in their eyes, but they did not say anything and very politely sent the 2 of them out of the prison. Leaving that dark and oppressive prison, even though Old Ma was someone who had seen a lot of the world, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief, mumbled, "That place is really not suitable for people to stay in." Lu Chen walked beside him, frowning and silent. As they walked, he suddenly glanced at Old Ma. Old Ma's heart jumped for no reason, said, "What? Did I really do something wrong?" Lu Chen asked him in a low voice. Old Ma was speechless, for a moment he did not know what to say. Of course, he would not say that Lu Chen was wrong, but just when he wanted to say that he did not do anything wrong and did the right thing, the scene from not long ago suddenly appeared in his mind. Su Qingjuan's sudden questioning was like a whip lashing at him. The imagined cruel scene in his mind made his words suddenly choke in his throat, unable to come out. After a while, Old Ma said bitterly, "Don't let your imagination run wild, it has been so many years. Moreover, back then when you were in the evil cult, if you really wanted to mess around, you would be surrounded by people from the evil cult, wouldn't that be seeking your own death?" As if he had finally found a reason, Old Ma breathed a sigh of relief, nodded repeatedly, and said, "So, even if you make a move to save people, most likely you will not be able to save people, and will instead harm your own life, it is not worth it, right?" Lu Chen's expression still looked very strange, he seemed to be suddenly immersed in the past, somewhat unable to extricate himself. After a while, his face suddenly became a little pale. Old Ma looked at him, couldn't help but be a little worried, and asked in a low voice, "Are you all right? I forgot the name." Old Ma was startled, and said, "What?" Lu Chen slowly raised a palm, staring at his own palm. A trace of pain and confusion finally gradually emerged in the depths of his eyes, even his voice carried a bit of bitterness. "I forgot that woman's name, Old Ma. I completely forgot her. Am I really like those people from the evil cult, born so cruel and heartless?" Lu Chen murmured, his face as pale as paper. Chapter 474. Behind the main hall of the Heavenly Law Hall was a stretch of green mountains. The trees on the mountain were verdant and the scenery was beautiful. At the peak of the mountain, there were clouds floating around all year round. Looking at it, it was like a fairyland. Even in the vast Sky Dragon Mountain range, it was a unique and good place. Such a spiritual mountain and blessed land was naturally occupied by powerful people, and this Baimu Peak was precisely occupied by the Heavenly Law Hall's true monarch Jianghu, who was in a favorable position, and became this deity transformation stage true monarch's dwelling in the true Immortal Alliance. There were many guards at the bottom of the mountain, but there were very few people at the top of the mountain. This was because Jianghu true monarch had issued a ban, no one could rashly go up the mountain without permission. As for the safety of the mountain, there was a deity transformation stage true monarch living there, what would he be afraid of? On the beautiful peak of Baimu Peak, there was a magnificent cave residence. This was Jianghu True Monarch's temporary imperial residence. And in the entire Heavenly Law Hall, besides Jianghu True Monarch, there was only one person who could freely enter and exit this place. That was Jianghu True Monarch's adopted daughter, Song Wenji. Ever since this woman appeared at Jianghu True Monarch's side, it seemed that she had always been taking care of this illustrious deity transformation stage True Monarch's daily life. Therefore, this could probably be considered as Song Wenji's home. This charming and beautiful woman was lying on the bed, her bright eyes looking at the smooth stone surface of the ceiling. The stone surface was like a mirror, and there was an indistinct reflection of an old body lying on top of her white, soft, plump and beautiful body. The old body was constantly wriggling, and the sound of panting echoed in this quiet stone room, mixed with some strange moans. Her beautiful hair was disheveled, her cheeks were somewhat flushed, and moans were coming from her mouth. Each moan was soft and captivating, but also caused one's blood to boil. It was as if she was deeply immersed in that bewitching passion and was unable to extricate herself. But only her pair of eyes were still quiet, bright, and cold. She looked coldly at herself in the reflection and at the woman who was moaning in the flesh. Deep in her eyes, a trace of inexplicable pain and disgust flashed past. Suddenly, the old man's breathing increased by a few notches. Song Wenji's gaze suddenly changed from clear and bright to blurry and crazy. She suddenly stretched out her bare white arms and hugged the man's neck tightly. Then, the moans in her mouth also became louder, as if she had become incomparably happy at that moment. However, at the corner of her mouth, there was a faint mocking smile. Finally, with a few soft cries, the old man seemed to have lost all his strength. He suddenly relaxed and fell on Song Wenji's plump body. At this moment, all of Song Wenji's strange emotions disappeared. She suddenly became a well-behaved woman. She shyly and resentfully hugged the man. Using a soul-stealing voice, she complained with a bit of breath, "Godfather, are you trying to torture your daughter to death?" That white-haired man was Jianghu Supreme. At this moment, he did not have his usual solemn and dignified expression. Instead, there was a bit of lust. If this scene was seen by outsiders, the jaws of everyone in the world would drop. And after hearing the words of this coquettish goddaughter, Jianghu Supreme seemed to be even happier. He laughed out loud and even wriggled his body a few times. With a bit of obscenity in his mouth, he teased, "Ha ha ha ha, my good daughter, are you convinced, are you convinced?" Song Wenji exclaimed and then hugged Jianghu Supreme's body. With a slightly trembling voice, as if crying and laughing at the same time, she said, "I am convinced, your daughter is convinced." At this moment, Jianghu Supreme seemed to have finally obtained great satisfaction. His body lay to the side and started to breathe heavily. Then, he reached out and hugged Song Wenji's soft white body. He sighed and said, "My good daughter, if not for you, I feel that I have lived my life in vain." Song Wenji nestled in the arms of this deity stage supreme. Hearing this, she laughed and said, "Father, you are joking again. You are a deity stage supreme. You have lived your life in a high position. You have experienced many storms and seen many wonderful things. How could you have lived your life in vain? You only know how to coax me." Jianghu Supreme snorted and looked at the smooth mirror-like stone surface above his head. He said, "You don't understand. For so many years, I have been burdened by those false reputations. In front of everyone in the world, I am justice, I am a moral article. In everyone's eyes, I am born to be solemn and just, clean and self-respecting. There can be no mistakes. I used to think so too. That's why I lived like that for most of my life, until I met you." He suddenly spat and said with disgust and hatred, "I've finally seen through everything. All the people in this world are strict with themselves and strict with others. It's funny that I've been stupid for half my life. It's only now that I understand the principle of enjoying life in the present. Song Wenji was touched. She said softly, "Father, you have suffered. But it's okay. You have such a high level of cultivation. You must have a long life ahead of you. Let me accompany you in the future." Jianghu Supreme nodded his head and laughed, "Of course, of course. As long as you are with me." Song Wenji suddenly said coquettishly, "But my cultivation is not as high as yours. I will grow old in the future. Perhaps at that time, you will not like me anymore." Lord Steelpot quickly shook his head and said, "No, no, as long as I am here, you can use all the rare treasures and cultivation resources in the world. In addition to that, I will personally protect you. I guarantee that your cultivation will improve tremendously and no one will be able to catch up to you. Your appearance will also remain youthful forever. But if that's the case, after a long time, maybe you'll get tired of looking at me, and probably don't want me anymore." At the end of her sentence, Song Wenji's eyes actually turned red. She looked like she was moved and hurt, and she was actually about to cry. The Iron Pot Lord was a hero of his generation. He had an earth-shattering cultivation and supernatural powers, but at this moment, he was helpless and looked extremely embarrassed. The girl in front of him was really his precious treasure. He was afraid that she would fall. He loved her dearly and spoiled her endlessly. Immediately his forehead was full of sweat. He coaxed her continuously. He even pointed to the heavens and swore to the earth. He said all kinds of mushy words and promises non-stop. With great difficulty he managed to coax this goddaughter until her tears turned into a smile. Jianghu Supreme heaved a sigh of relief. They talked and laughed for a while. Then they stood up. Song Wenji helped him put on his clothes. Then she changed back to the dignified Jianghu Supreme. Song Wenji went to the side and poured a cup of tea for him. Iron Pot True Lord took a sip and suddenly looked into the teacup and said, "This is the famous tea of Kunlun Mountain, little crane?" Song Wenji smiled and said, "Yes. A few days ago, Lord Tianlan held a disciple ceremony. You went to congratulate him and gave him a gift. There was a little of this tea in the return gift. But it was not much." Jianghu Supreme nodded and said, "This tea is indeed rare. It is rare to have a little of it." Then he looked at Song Wenji dotingly and said, "If you like this tea, you can drink it first. I'll go to Tianlan later and ask him to bring some more." Song Wenji was stunned. There seemed to be a glimmer in the depths of her eyes. Then she said with a little doubt, "Don't go. Don't you have a normal relationship with that person?" True Monarch Taihu said disapprovingly, "It's just SOSO, but who can really tear his face apart? Look at his disciple acceptance ceremony, didn't I also go there? I have to give face. Moreover, if I ask him for some tea, he will give me face." Song Wenji suddenly smiled as if she was very happy. She said, "Thank you, foster father. You are so good to me." Jianghu Supreme looked a little proud. But after a while, he seemed to think of something. His face showed a thoughtful expression. Then he said slowly, "Speaking of this, I feel that there is something strange in Tianlan and Fuyunji recently." Song Wenji was surprised and said, "What's wrong?" Jianghu Supreme frowned and said, "He transferred a lot of people from the Kunlun party. He said that he wants to fight against the devil cult. Of course, he has been fighting against the devil cult for so many years. It is not the first time that he transferred people from the Kunlun party. It is not strange that he did not." After thinking for a long time, he still shook his head. Song Wenji looked at his expression and suddenly said, "Foster father, do you suspect that there is something wrong with Fuyunji?" Jianghu Supreme pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Have you met Lu Chen, the new disciple of Tianlan?" "Yes." "Well, then do me a favor." Then, Supreme Jianghu's voice deepened, as if he was narrating something. Chapter 475. After the sky darkened, the bustling immortal city started to quiet down. Although there were many bustling places that were still brightly lit, and the laughter of welcome and farewell echoed in the night, most places still entered the silence of the night. In the alley behind the horse-washing bridge, a white-clothed girl walked over alone, and stopped in front of that house. Her figure seemed a little lonely, and her face faintly looked a little haggard. But from her expression, she had already recovered her initial calmness and beauty, and once again became a fairy that didn't eat the food of the mortal world. She was White Lotus. She stood at the door for a while, and using some unknown method, she gently opened the door, and then walked in. Far behind her, on the horse-washing bridge outside the alley, two black figures slowly appeared. Seeing White Lotus walk into the house, they looked at each other, and seemed to have a feeling of relief. Finally returned. Following this little grandaunt for a few days and nights, I'm almost exhausted to death. Come on, at least she's safe and sound. Last night, you saw her walk to the edge of the immortal city. If she took another step forward, she would have crossed the boundary. My heart was hanging in my throat. The person in front said in a low voice, "What did you say?" The person at the side was startled, and then smiled bitterly, "Don't let your imagination run wild. That little girl is so beautiful, how many have you seen? I really don't want to kill her, but if I really did, I still feel that it would be a pity." The person in front was silent. He probably felt the same way. After a while, he said unhappily, "Forget it. In any case, the orders from above are not to leave the city. Once you cross the border, you are not to be left alive. I don't know if that girl feels that way, but in any case, it's fine if she returns now. Big brother, who do you think gave the order to kill her? It's really ruthless." "Ruthless what? You talk too much." The person in front was startled and covered the mouth of the person next to him. Then, he looked around vigilantly. After confirming that there was no movement around, he let go of his hand and shouted in a low voice, "Are you crazy? White Lotus is with Immortal. How dare you talk nonsense about this?" "Ah!" That person's neck shrank in fear. He seemed to have suddenly thought of something and looked at the house with some fear. The person in front also looked over. After a while, he seemed to be a little emotional. He sighed and said, "Let's go. That girl's fate is not good, but it's not our fault. Someone will be coming over to take over later. Go and rest." The two shadows once again disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the silent night surrounding the houses. On the grass in the courtyard, the black dog was lying on the ground with a pair of dog eyes closed. It seemed that he had fallen asleep. Lu Chen was lying next to Atsu. His eyes were staring at the faint twinkling stars in the dark night sky, his body lying motionless. At this time, a voice came from the side. "I say, what's so good about those stars in the sky? Why did you look at them for so long?" Lu Chen turned around and looked at old Ma, who was holding a wine pot and drinking by himself. He shook his head and said nothing. Old Ma was a little helpless. He said, "I say, you don't have to be like this, right? I've known you for many years. Don't talk about that stupid thing where you leave people to die. How many lives have you killed and how much blood have you seen? Your heart will only be harder than mine, not softer than mine. Why are you suddenly so inexplicably unable to think things through today?" He suddenly seemed to think of something. A strange expression flashed across his face. He looked down at Lu Chen and said, "Don't tell me, you really have some feelings for Su Qingjun? That's why you care so much about what she says?" Lu Chen frowned. When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard light footsteps coming from the corridor ahead. Lu Chen and old Ma were both taken aback. They turned their heads to look at the source of the voice. A while later, they saw the white-robed Bai Lian walk out from the shadows of the corridor. She walked all the way to the courtyard and stood in front of them. Lu Chen and old Ma both stood up. Old Ma spoke first with a smile, "White Lotus, you're back." White Lotus responded and nodded to him. Then she looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen gave a hollow laugh. He felt a little uncomfortable. But after hesitating for a moment, he still said, "White Lotus, I really didn't mean to do this to you, I know." White Lotus interrupted Lu Chen. She looked calm and said, "I've thought about it. It's my fault. I used to think that I was destined to have a smooth life because I have the talent of 5 pillars. Everyone would value me. Even after my master passed away, the other elders in the sect would do the same. But now I know that it doesn't include Martial Uncle Tianlan. I was too optimistic." Lu Chen and Old Ma looked at each other and didn't know what to say for a moment. White Lotus was silent for a moment and said, "I'm a little tired. I'll go to bed first." As she said this, she turned around and walked to her room. Unexpectedly, she was suddenly stopped by Old Ma. White Lotus looked over with some surprise, only to see Old Ma smile awkwardly. He turned around and ran into the house first, then tossed and turned inside for a while. Finally, he ran out with a large pile of bedding and clothes. He smiled dryly at White Lotus and then ran into Lu Chen's house. White Lotus was silent for a while and turned to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen had an awkward expression on his face. He coughed dryly and smiled a little unnaturally. Old Ma lives at my place, and he's been getting bullied by Atu all day long. He can only sleep on the floor. Plus, you had such a big reaction that day, and we couldn't find you for a few days, so he thought you wouldn't come back." White Lotus snorted and glared at him. Then she strode past Lu Chen. Lu Chen quickly stepped aside as if he had done something wrong. When White Lotus was about to reach the door of the room, she suddenly turned around and called, "Hey!" Lu Chen said, "What's wrong?" White Lotus stared at him and said after a while, "Do you think I'm still useful to Martial Uncle Tianlan?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly tightened. Then he smiled and said, "You're so powerful. Of course, you're useful." White Lotus nodded. It seemed that the fierceness and uneasiness hidden deep in her eyes softened a little. Then she turned around and went into the room. Lu Chen looked over there for a long time until Old Ma walked back to him. Lu Chen looked back at him and saw that Old Ma's face was a little strange. He couldn't help frowning and asking, "What's wrong?" Old Ma sighed softly and lowered his voice, saying, "You should know in your heart that she's useless." Lu Chen was silent. Seeing that his face was a little ugly, Old Ma shook his head and changed the topic, saying, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Anyway, it doesn't matter what we say. You haven't answered me yet. What were you thinking about when you were in a daze for so long?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly said something without rhyme or reason, "Her name is Song Hui." Old Ma was stunned and asked, "What do you mean?" Lu Chen said slowly, "I've thought about it for a long time and carefully recalled it bit by bit. Finally, I remembered the name of the dead woman. Her name is Song Hui." He turned to Old Ma and said with a serious look on his face, "Do me a favor, Old Ma. Go and check this woman's background." Chapter 476. When the sun rose in the early morning, the soft sunlight shone through the gap of the window and turned into a beam of pale golden light falling on the bed. White Lotus was wrapped in the quilt, curled up into a ball and slept. Her slender eyelashes flickered occasionally, and her face was slightly pale. She looked like a frightened kitten, slightly trembling in her dream. When the ray of sunlight finally moved to her eyes, perhaps it was because of the dazzling light, or perhaps it was because of the warmth, Bai Lian's body suddenly trembled. She cried out in surprise and sat up abruptly. She opened her eyes wide and looked forward. What came into view was the familiar furniture of the house, the white walls, the tables and chairs. White Lotus stared blankly for a while, and her originally rapid breathing gradually calmed down, as if she had broken free from that nightmare. She reached out her hand and gently touched her forehead. Then she lifted the quilt and got out of bed. She walked to the table and poured a glass of water. She didn't care that it was the cold water from last night and drank it in big gulps. There was a faint movement in the yard outside the house. White Lotus glanced outside. After hesitating for a moment, she tidied up her clothes, walked to the door, opened the door, and walked out. The warm sunlight suddenly sprinkled on her slim body. The dazzling golden light made her slightly squint. After a while, she saw that in the yard, Lu Chen and Old Ma were standing there talking, but Atsu was nowhere to be seen. He was probably still sleeping in the house. Seeing White Lotus come out, Lu Chen and Old Ma stopped talking and smiled at her. Then Lu Chen said to Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and turned to leave. But he seemed to think of something and turned to Lu Chen and said, I can help you investigate, but those things in the past, how can I take care of them one by one? Let's forget about it. Lu Chen nodded slightly, and his face was also calm. He said, I understand. It's okay. Don't worry. Old Ma smiled and turned to walk out. White Lotus walked over slowly. After watching Old Ma's figure disappear from her sight, she said to Lu Chen, what does he want to help you investigate? Why does it sound so weird? It's just an old matter of adulthood. It's nothing important. Lu Chen waved his hand and said nonchalantly. At the same time, he looked her up and down and smiled. Did you sleep well last night? White Lotus said, very good, I fell asleep as soon as I went to bed, and slept until dawn. If you don't sleep for several days and nights, you'll probably end up like this too. Lu Chen's eyes flickered as he looked at White Lotus. What's wrong? Is there something on your mind? White Lotus nodded, but she did not say what was on her mind. Instead, she stared at Lu Chen and said, can I follow you to do something today? Lu Chen was stunned. Just as he was about to say something, he heard White Lotus say again, the order for me to follow you was also given by your Shizuan, my uncle master, perfected Lord Tian Lan. This shouldn't be a problem, right? Lu Chen was silent. Then, he sighed and said, all right. Fuyunji had captured a total of 12 surviving members of the devil cult during the battle in the underground palace of the Immortal City. Now, all of them were imprisoned in the prison specially prepared for the captives of the devil cult. As the new disciple of perfected Lord Tian Lan, Lu Chen's public mission was to deal with the sinister and vicious devil cult. Therefore, on this day, he brought White Lotus to this prison again. The first time he came here, it was Old Ma and Su Qingjun who followed him. This time, it was all changed. She became a white-clothed girl who looked exceptionally beautiful and had the temperament of a fairy. However, from the strange looks of the prison guards, it could be seen that White Lotus's temperament did not seem to be too harmonious with this place. This dirty, dark and stinky place where evil was imprisoned seemed to be of a completely different world from the most beautiful fairy in people's imagination. However, White Lotus did not seem to care about this. She calmly followed Lu Chen into this dark place. At Lu Chen's request, the guards brought them to the room that was used to interrogate prisoners, which was the so-called interrogation room. As for the prisoners, of course, they were the surviving members of the devil cult who had been captured recently. However, after careful questioning, the leader, Chen He, was seriously injured and unconscious and could not be interrogated for the time being. There were also 6 or 7 people, so in the end, only 5 people could be brought over. While the others were waiting outside, Lu Chen and White Lotus were also sitting in this interrogation room. Then, they looked at the various torture instruments stained with dark red blood around them and looked at each other speechlessly. A faint smell of blood seemed to permeate this place, causing people to feel nauseous. It also caused people to feel a chill down their spines. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and whispered to White Lotus, this place is not suitable for you. Why don't you go back first? White Lotus slowly shook her head and said, I will help you here. Lu Chen frowned and said, what will you help me with? White Lotus looked at him and said softly, I can help you with anything you want to do. Lu Chen frowned even more and said, "What are you thinking?" White Lotus took a step forward and looked at Lu Chen and said, "No matter what you want me to do, I can help you. But can you please tell Martial Uncle Tianlan that I still have some use for you when you see him later?" Lu Chen suddenly became silent. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and said, "There is no need to do that, I don't want to die." White Lotus suddenly interrupted him. She stared at Lu Chen's eyes and suddenly grabbed Lu Chen's hand. She held it tightly and said word by word, "Do you dare to tell me that Martial Uncle will definitely not kill me?" Lu Chen was speechless. White Lotus's body trembled slightly and then she slowly lowered her head and said, "He publicly accepted you as his disciple. It means that he is no longer afraid and doesn't have to worry about anything. I am probably useless to him, right?" She gritted her teeth and suddenly her eyes became a little red. She whispered, "I am only 14 years old. I don't want to die." Lu Chen forced a smile and pulled his hand out of her soft palm and said, "There is no evidence. Maybe you are thinking too much. By the way, look at your second senior brother. He is fine. I am a Wuzhu talent." White Lotus's face was pale and she said in a trembling voice, "Wuzhu, if I can't be his disciple, then in the future, he will think about the dead senior brother every day and leave behind a rare Wuzhu talent disciple. If it were you, what would you do?" Lu Chen's mouth squirmed, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Some truths, in fact, everyone understood it in their heart. They just pretended not to understand until others tore off the disguise and put the cruel and bloody facts in front of them. Dong dong dong. There was a knock on the door. White Lotus wiped her eyes and walked over to open the door. At the same time, she murmured, "Let me help you. In this world, besides you, who else will he listen to?" Lu Chen stood in the same place, silent. When old Ma arrived outside the prison, it was the time of the day when the sun was at its brightest. However, standing at the entrance of the prison, the chilly wind that blew out from inside still made people shiver in their hearts. It was a bit bone-chilling. However, he didn't enter the prison because Lu Chen and White Lotus also came out at this time. When old Ma was about to speak, he found that both of their faces didn't look good. Old Ma looked at them suspiciously, then he pulled Lu Chen aside and whispered, "Are you okay?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and looked at White Lotus, then he sighed and said, "I'm fine." Old Ma followed his gaze and was suddenly startled. He saw White Lotus standing alone under a tree over there. She looked as cold as usual, but for some reason, it always made people feel a little strange. After a moment, Old Ma suddenly frowned and his eyes swept over White Lotus. He saw that the hem of her white dress was stained with blood in several places. Even her soft and white palms were dyed dark red. It was a ghastly sight. Old Ma's heart suddenly jumped and he subconsciously swallowed his saliva. Looking at the silent figure of the girl, he casually asked, "Did you find out anything?" Lu Chen said, "Yes." In the distance, under the sunlight of the tree, White Lotus raised his head and looked at the scattered rays of sunlight sprinkling down from the dense branches and leaves. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and then seemed to feel a chill in his body, and his body trembled. Chapter 477. At the entrance of the prison far away, a few Fuyunji prison guards were watching from afar. Although there was a distance between them, one could still see the strange and complicated expressions on their faces. And most of their gazes were on White Lotus, who was quietly standing under the big tree. White Lotus seemed to be unaware of the gazes from the outside. She squinted her eyes and looked up for a while. Then she pulled out a silk handkerchief and started to wipe her hands. The red blood stains dyed the white silk red, making the handkerchief dirty. But the blood stains on her palms only lightened in color. She was unable to wipe them clean. White Lotus wiped them hard, bit by bit, as if she was very patient. Old Ma frowned, retracted his gaze and said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "What did you get from her?" Lu Chen said, "There are 3 secret nests of the evil faction in Immortal City that we didn't know about before. And there are more than 20 spies lurking in Immortal City." Old Ma said, "The previous incident was so big, these evil faction remnants that we didn't catch most likely all ran away?" Lu Chen nodded. He had obviously thought of this as well. "That's true. We've been delayed here for a few days, so I'm guessing that a lot of them have escaped. However, some of them are single-person contacts, and they're well-hidden spies. If we don't contact them, they might not make a move." Old Ma nodded and said, "This is a good harvest. Usually it's hard to get information out of them." As he spoke, he turned his head to look under the big tree. After a moment of hesitation, he asked Lu Chen in a low voice, "How did she ask? Is her method very powerful?" On the word powerful, Old Ma intentionally or unintentionally emphasized it. Lu Chen also understood what he meant. He said in a deep voice, "Very powerful." Old Ma sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked surprised and said, "She is such a delicate little girl and grew up in an aristocratic family. How could she know this kind of method? Who knows?" Lu Chen shook his head and muttered. At the same time, the scene of him and Atsu meeting White Lotus for the first time on Kunlun Mountain suddenly appeared in his mind. At that time, in the deep forest, the wild beasts were covered in wounds and blood. It was a terrible sight to behold. Even now, when he recalled that scene, Lu Chen seemed to be able to smell a strong stench of blood. Old Ma saw that Lu Chen's expression was a little ugly, so he asked, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then he shook his head and said nonchalantly, "I'm fine." Old Ma did not pursue the matter. He changed the topic and asked, "These are all trivial matters. What about Elder Gui? Did you find out the whereabouts of that person?" "No." Lu Chen said, "I did ask, but even in the evil faction, that old tortoise only contacted Chen He. All the other evil faction evil people have never seen this person." Old Ma was taken aback. His face turned a little ugly and said, "This guy is very careful." These few years, the evil cult had been on the decline and they were also being chased by the True Immortal Alliance and the Fuyan Agency, these huge organizations. Therefore, it was not surprising that the only remaining elder ghost was exceptionally careful. However, as the highest-ranking elder in the entire evil cult, he was actually so cowardly that he only contacted one person. This still made one somewhat speechless. "Then we can only interrogate Chen He?" Old Ma asked. Lu Chen nodded and said, "Let's wait for him to wake up first." As he said this, he glanced at Old Ma and slightly raised his eyebrows. He said, "Didn't you say you were going to investigate that matter this morning? Did you find anything?" After hearing his words, Old Ma suddenly had a strange expression on his face. He first looked left and right, then pulled Lu Chen 2 steps to the side and whispered, "That woman's name, did you remember wrongly?" "Remember wrongly?" Lu Chen looked at him in astonishment. Then he frowned and thought carefully for a while. Finally, he firmly said to Old Ma, "Yes, it is the name, Song Hui." Old Ma sighed and said, "There is no woman with this name in Xianxia Meng's name list." "No?" Lu Chen's expression changed. Old Ma nodded and replied with certainty, "I've looked through all the people with the surname Song, and there is no such name." Lu Chen fell silent for a while. It should be known that Xianxia Meng could almost be regarded as the most prosperous and powerful cultivator organization in history. In addition to the many extremely powerful cultivators, it relied on all kinds of comprehensive rules. All the cultivators who had joined Xianxia Meng would definitely be recorded in the name list. Therefore, if there was no Song Hui on the name list, there were only 2 possibilities. One was that Lu Chen remembered the woman's name wrongly. The other was that he remembered the woman's identity wrongly. Perhaps she was not from Xianxia Meng. This was also the situation Old Ma was thinking about. But after frowning and thinking for a long time, Lu Chen finally said to Old Ma with certainty, "If I remember correctly, that woman is indeed from Xianxia. Old Ma spread out his hands helplessly. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly said to him, "There is another secret name list in Xianxia." Old Ma was shocked and whispered, "Didn't you say she was not a shadow of Fuyunji?" Lu Chen nodded and slightly frowned, "I remember she is not. But just in case, can you help me to check again?" Old Ma showed an awkward expression and said, "That is a name list specially for you shadows. In the whole Sky Dragon Mountain, only Lord Immortal and Hall Master Xueying can read it. If I go there rashly..." Lu Chen looked at him and then slowly said, "Forget it, I will ask Xueying for it." After saying that, he turned around and left. But before he left, he looked back at White Lotus but saw that White Lotus did not look at them from beginning to end. She just stood there quietly and wiped her hands with a silk handkerchief. And now, the square silk handkerchief had completely turned red. Lu Chen came to the main hall of Fuyunji and asked someone to inform him that he wanted to see Xueying. But very soon, someone very politely came to tell him that Hall Master Xueying had gone down Sky Dragon Mountain early in the morning and had not returned yet. Lu Chen asked where Xueying went, but the people of Fuyunji just shook their heads that they did not know. It was said that the whereabouts of that person had always been mysterious. No one knew. Of course, no one dared to ask where she went. Lu Chen felt a little helpless, but he could only turn back. But when he passed by the courtyard of the Kunlun party's experts, he stopped. After a slight hesitation, he walked in that direction. One of the houses in the row was where Su Qingjun was living. No matter what, Lu Chen still wanted to talk to this woman and at least explain what had happened that day. But just as he walked to the door of Su Qingjun's residence, he suddenly saw a slender figure walking towards him. She was charming and beautiful, and her eyes were like water. It was Song Wenji, whom he had not seen for a long time. At the same time, Song Wenji also saw Lu Chen. A smile immediately appeared on her face. Like a lotus leaf blown by the wind, she walked over with snake-like steps and stood in front of Lu Chen. She smiled and said, "Where are you going, junior brother Lu?" "You called me junior brother?" Lu Chen was a little surprised. Song Wenji laughed and said, "Isn't that normal? Your master, true Lord Tianlan, and my foster father, true Lord Tiehu, have been best friends for many years. I became his foster daughter much earlier than you, so it's not too much for me to call you junior brother, right?" Lu Chen smiled bitterly. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and said, "Whatever." Song Wenji's charming eyes moved. Suddenly, she smiled sweetly and said, "It's rare to meet you. My house is not far in front. Why don't you come to my house and have a cup of tea?" Lu Chen shook his head and was about to refuse. He said, "I'm sorry, Song Wenji covered her mouth and interrupted his words. She seemed to be in high spirits and in a good mood. She smiled and said, "I'll let you witness my tea ceremony skills." "Oh yes, my tea is also good. Speaking of which, we are fated. It's your Kunlun Mountain's famous tea, Little Crane." Little Crane. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. After a while, he let out a long breath and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." Song Wenji giggled like a coquettish spring flower blooming. For a moment, her beauty was unparalleled. It was as if her whole person had brightened up. She pointed her fair finger forward and said, "It's just in front. Follow me." Chapter 478. Just as Lu Chen and Song Wenji were about to leave, they suddenly heard a squeaking sound coming from the door not far away, and then it was pushed open. Then, Su Qingjun came out. There were 2 stone steps at the door. Su Qingjun was standing on the stone steps and was about to go down when she saw the figures of Lu Chen and Song Wenji standing together. There was a hint of surprise on her face. Her eyes lingered on Song Wenji's charming face and enchanting figure for a moment, and then fell on Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He wanted to say something to Su Qingjun, but he didn't know what to say for a moment. He just smiled at her and nodded. Song Wenji, who was next to him, was also a smart and astute woman. At a glance, she could tell that the situation between the man and the woman seemed to be a little different. Her eyes flickered for a moment, then she smiled at Lu Chen and said, "Senior brother Lu, who is this?" Her words were spoken in an unusually gentle manner. Coupled with her watery eyes and gentle smile, she was truly charming but not obscene. She was a beautiful woman who could make anyone's eyes light up and feel tender affection for her. Lu Chen saw that Su Qingjun's face quickly became cold, and was speechless for a moment. After shaking his head slightly, he said, "Let me introduce you, this is Su Qingjun of the Kunlun Party. Qingjun, this is junior sister Song Wenji of the Heavenly Law Hall of Xianxia. She is the adopted daughter of the Iron Pot Immortal. A while ago, she helped us track down the evil people in the Immortal City." He purposely emphasized the word help. It was obvious that Song Wenji's previous help was actually a hindrance. However, Song Wenji didn't seem to hear this at all. She smiled at Su Qingjun and said, "Shiji Su, this is the first time we meet. I don't know if you have time now. Why don't you go have tea with us?" "Tea?" Su Qingjun frowned and glanced at Lu Chen. Song Wenji laughed and said, "That's right. It wasn't easy for me to invite senior martial brother Lu to my place to drink tea. Moreover, the tea leaves are the famous little crane tea produced by your Kunlun sect. Senior martial sister Su, you should come too." Su Qingjun's face was indifferent. After looking at Lu Chen, she said with a trace of alienation, "Thank you, Miss Song, but I have something to do now. I will disturb you again when I have the chance in the future." With that, she turned to leave. But at this time, the two women suddenly heard a cough from Lu Chen, and then they heard Lu Qingjun say, "Lu Chen, Song Chen, to say, I, Lu Chen, to say, I you, I to say, I, Chen, Lu, to Qing to say. There. I suddenly, I Su to say, I see, Qing Su's Chen's to say to. And. Let's wait for next time, I'm sorry. Song Wenji's smile froze for a moment, then she looked at Lu Chen with a smile that was not a smile, and said, "Senior brother Lu, you are really a busy man." Lu Chen laughed dryly and walked toward Su Qingjun while waving his hand at her. After that, he smiled apologetically and said, "I'm really sorry, I really do have something to do. I'll treat you to a good meal in Immortal City next time." Song Wenji looked at the two people walking away one after another, the surprise on her face did not disappear. Thinking about it, ever since she grew up, especially after she became the adopted daughter of Tai Hu deity, it had been a long time since someone dared to stand her up, and the excuse was not at all reliable. She glanced at Lu Chen's back, and after a while, she suddenly smiled. She didn't seem to be too angry, and only nodded thoughtfully. Then, her eyes fell on Su Qingjun's back, and her eyes gradually brightened. "Why are you following me?" After walking for a distance and seeing that there was no one around, and only Lu Chen was walking beside her, Su Qingjun stopped and said to him with a slight frown. Lu Chen also stopped, and after a moment of silence, said, "Qingjun, I have something to say to you." Su Qingjun's face was a little gloomy and cold, but it was hard to tell whether she was happy or sad. She only said indifferently, "What are you talking to me about instead of drinking tea and chatting with Beauty Song? Besides, didn't you just say that you have an important prisoner to interrogate in Fuyunji prison?" Lu Chen said, "I was just brushing her off." Su Qingjun suddenly clenched her teeth, looking a little angry, and said coldly, "So you lied to her? You always like to lie to people, and do everything you do. Lies come out of your mouth. That's why you were able to deceive me on Kunlun Mountain, and make me trust you so much?" Lu Chen opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but soon stopped. After a long while, he said with a bitter smile, "If you want to say it like that, it doesn't seem wrong. More than 10 years ago, I was a shadow lying in ambush in the evil sect, and I lived this kind of life of lying to people all day long." Saying this, he shook his head, and his expression suddenly seemed a little bleak. He sighed, "That kind of life is not easy." As a young boy, he had mingled with a group of vicious demons since he was young. He lived a precarious life, and no one knew when he would suddenly lose his life. How could such a life be easy? Just thinking about it made one's scalp tingle. Su Qingjun wasn't a stupid woman. She was very smart, so she quickly thought of Lu Chen's situation back then. This slightly moved her expression, and there was even a trace of pity in the depths of her eyes when she looked at Lu Chen. However, in the end, she was not a weak woman. After taking a deep breath, she shook her head and said in a low voice, "I know it has not been easy for you, but today, the bitterness has finally come to an end." With that, she turned around and was about to walk forward again. Lu Chen took a step forward to stop her. Su Qingjun frowned, "Is there anything else?" Lu Chen gazed at her clear and bright eyes. "Qingjun, it doesn't matter what you think of me, including that day in the prison. You feel that I was wrong for not saving that woman called Song Hui. That's up to you. But I only hope that you still remember, there are many lunatics among those evil sect evil people. In the future when you meet with these people, you must be careful, you must not be soft-hearted, otherwise, in the end, you will hurt yourself." Su Qingjun took a deep breath and looked at Lu Chen. "Thank you for your reminder. I will remember it. But I don't understand. Don't you feel the slightest bit of remorse for that woman?" Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he said softly, "To tell you the truth, I don't regret it." Su Qingjun glared at him angrily. Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief and said, "At that time, I was surrounded by demons of the devil cult. I couldn't save her. Even if I tried, I would have perished together with them. Moreover, I had another mission." "Really, were you afraid?" Su Qingjun said coldly, "At that time, were you afraid of death?" Lu Chen raised his head to look at Su Qingjun. He frowned slightly and his expression sank. After a while, he said calmly, "I don't think I'm afraid of death. If I was afraid of death, perhaps I wouldn't have stayed in the evil sect for so long and done so many things. Qingjun, you grew up in a peaceful family. You won't understand the situation of a shadow like me. If you were in that situation and saw me being captured and abused, then you would also. I will take action." Su Qingjun suddenly interrupted Lu Chen and said calmly. "What?" Lu Chen was stunned. "I will save you, even if I have to die with you." Su Qingjun gazed deeply at him and walked forward without looking back. Chapter 479. A person's life is so long. There are bound to be crossroads. Sometimes you can choose, and sometimes you don't even have the chance to choose. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the gentle moonlight shone on the quiet yard. Lu Chen and Old Ma sat opposite each other. Atsu was lying at Lu Chen's feet, and White Lotus was nowhere to be seen. She should have gone back to her room to sleep. After listening to Lu Chen's words, Old Ma didn't seem to care and said, "I don't think so. When will we really have the chance to choose?" Lu Chen picked up the wine pot and poured himself a glass of wine. He said, "You see, I have 2 places to sleep. One is the magnificent and spacious Kunlun temple on the mountain, and the other is this obscure place with you, an eyesore. But I chose to live here. This is the choice we can make. You. Okay." Old Ma waved his hand and looked speechless. After a while, he suddenly asked, "Don't you plan to talk to Su Qingjun?" Lu Chen's hand that was holding the wine cup paused for a moment. Then he raised his head and drank it. He shook his head and said, "No." Old Ma asked, "Why?" "Everyone has different ideas. They can't be together." The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched. There seemed to be a bitter smile. Then he sighed and said, "Like we said before, we have come to a crossroad. I chose this path, but she chose the other one. What else can we do? In addition, I killed her brother on the mountain in Kunlun a few years ago. If she is with me, she will not be accepted by her parents and the whole Su family. So let's forget it." Old Ma nodded. He didn't look too surprised. It seemed that he had expected this result. He said, "This is also good. You two are not very suitable for each other. If you separate, everyone will be more relaxed." Lu Chen lowered his eyes slightly and slowly poured himself a cup of wine. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Yeah, it's good to treat her this way. Anyway, all the women who were close to me are dead now." It was late at night, and the moonlight seemed to become a little cold. Old Ma yawned and stood up to go back to his room to sleep. Turning his head, he saw that Lu Chen was still sitting there in a daze. Old Ma patted him on the shoulder and said, "What are you thinking? Go back to sleep." Lu Chen said, "Nothing. I just thought that Su Qingjun said today that she would rather die together than to save me. I just felt a little emotional." Old Ma said, He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Do you think that Su Qingjun said those words out of anger, or will she really do what she said?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "According to my understanding of her, if she said she will save, she will most likely do it." Old Ma said, "Even if she was surrounded by evil sect demons at that time, even if there was no hope of saving people and she would almost certainly lose her life? Even so, she will still save people?" Lu Chen nodded and said, "Should be. I guess in her heart, she must be thinking that she can't bear to see the people important to her being abused and suffering. So she will do anything to help. Even if she is in a desperate situation, she will first relieve the pain of others. In the end, she will also lose her life by committing suicide. It's not worth it." Old Ma frowned and said, "It is the first time I have heard of someone like her." Lu Chen looked at him and did not speak. Old Ma said, "What's wrong? Could it be that after what Su Qingjun said to you, you also have some regrets about what happened that year?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, "I have already told her during the day, even if I have to do it again, my choice will still not change. I will still hide in the evil sect without saying a word until the end." Old Ma smiled and was about to speak when he suddenly heard Lu Chen said, "But now I don't think that Su Qingjun is definitely wrong. Sometimes I will think, could it be that we have been shadows for too long? What we see, hear and think are all the same." Everyone said to be calm, to be patient, to look at the overall situation, to do whatever it takes for the final success, even if we have to sacrifice ourselves, it doesn't matter. Doesn't it matter if the person sacrificed is ourselves or others? Yes, until today I still don't think I have done anything wrong, because the Battle of the Desolate Valley proved that my patience was worth it. But is Su Qingjun's way of thinking necessarily wrong? If I were the one being abused and suffered, would I look forward to having a friend like Su Qingjun? I don't know, Old Ma, I have never understood this matter." Old Ma was silent for a long time and said, "Forget it, don't think too much. That Miss Su is after all not the same kind of person as us." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Yes, I also thought of this before I made up my mind. Qingjun is cold on the outside but warm on the inside, kind-hearted, as if she has been standing in the light since she was a child. She is so different from me, a shadow." Old Ma pulled him towards the house and said with a smile, "Looking at your emotional appearance, could it be that you feel that you are not worthy of that Miss Su?" Lu Chen smiled and then shook his head, saying, "I don't mean that, but I have lived in the shadow all my life and am used to the darkness. So from now on, let me help her with those dark, dirty, and disgusting things. As for herself, she only needs to stand in the light." Old Ma couldn't help but laugh and looked at him mockingly, saying, TSK, you have suddenly become like a saint, scaring me to death. Come on, in fact, it is rare for you to see a beautiful and clean thing, so you can't bear to dirty it. Don't talk so much nonsense. So many of us have died in the past, but I have never seen you soften your heart. In the end, isn't it because Su Qingjun is young and beautiful, you like her? Old Ma swayed his fat body, put his hands behind his back and walked into the bedroom disapprovingly. At the same time, he said, in this immortal city, black is black, white will eventually become black, don't be wishful thinking. Lu Chen stopped in his tracks and remained silent. He raised his head to look at the night sky and saw that the moon was bright and clear. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that there were still dark clouds drifting through the moonlight. The next morning, Lu Chen woke up Old Ma and prepared to go up the mountain to the Floating Clouds Agency. There were two things he wanted to do. First, it was the secret name list in Shui Ying's hands. Second, it was to find out how to continue hunting down the remnants of the evil cult. This kind of top-secret list would never be seen by ordinary people, but now, Lu Chen's identity was completely different. As the well-known successor of Lord Tianlan, and it was obvious that that lord was doing his best to cultivate him, so Lu Chen's power and authority had increased rapidly overnight, even to the point where he could faintly compete with Shuang. Even Shuang was not willing to have an open conflict with Lu Chen at this time, so she readily agreed to Lu Chen's request. As Lu Chen's only good friend for many years, Old Ma's status had risen recently. He was very popular both inside and outside of Fuyunji, and everyone looked up to him. This made Old Ma very proud, and he worked very hard. Therefore, around noon that day, Old Ma, who was in charge of searching for the list, suddenly ran to Fuyunji to find Lu Chen. At that time, Lu Chen was discussing with Shuang how to investigate the spies who had confessed. After all, they could not rely on the one-sided story of the devil cult's demons to kill and capture them. What if those people were deliberately speaking nonsense? When Old Ma came in, there was a clear strange expression on his face. After bowing to Shuang, he walked to Lu Chen's side and said, "That woman called Song Hui, we found her, but there's a problem." Chapter 480. After walking out of Fuyunji, Lu Chen said to Old Ma, "Did you see Shui Ying's expression just now?" Old Ma nodded, "She's probably curious too. After all, your identity is different now. She'll think more about everything you do. It's human nature. But are you really not going to avoid her?" Lu Chen said, "I can't avoid her. Although you and I have been working in Fuyunji for many years, we can't compare to her in terms of our foundation in Immortal City. As long as the damn Baldy doesn't really intend to replace this woman, we'll need her help for many things in the future. So, we might as well make it clear to her. Even if we want to investigate the past, we won't be able to do so without alerting her." That's true. Old Ma seemed to be well aware of this situation. What he said just now was more like a reminder to Lu Chen. When they got close to the Kunlun temple, Lu Chen looked around and saw that there was no one around. He asked, "What's the strange thing you mentioned just now?" Old Ma said, "I found Song Hui's name on Fuyunji's secret list. But in the records, Song Hui shouldn't be from Fuyunji." Lu Chen was startled, a trace of surprise on his face. Old Ma smiled bitterly and said, "You've also figured it out. The secret list in Shui Ying's hands is commonly known as the Shadow List in our Floating Clouds Agency. The names on it are all the most secretive shadows. But Song Hui's identity is a female disciple of Xianxiameng's Grand Chancellor in the past. Apart from dying at the hands of the devil cult, there's almost nothing unusual about this woman's life." Lu Chen's brows slowly furrowed. He said, "It's not the Floating Clouds Agency's shadow, and there's nothing out of the ordinary about her. However, her name was included in this most secretive list?" Old Ma nodded with a hint of hesitation on his face. Lu Chen saw his expression and said, "What's wrong? What are you trying to say?" Old Ma said in a low voice, those who are on the shadow list will have their traces secretly erased by Fuyunji. In other words, if Song Hui doesn't have many friends and relatives, it's unlikely that anyone will remember her after a decade. Even if someone tries to investigate, they won't be able to find anything. Lu Chen fell silent. After a moment, he suddenly exhaled softly and said, just like me? Old Ma nodded and said, just like you. If one day he succeeded and survived, he might become famous in the world. However, if he gave up halfway and failed on the verge of success, then all his achievements, all his fame, even if he was a flesh and blood person, would eventually become a name on the list of shadows hidden in the darkness. But if he gave up halfway and failed on the verge of success, then all his achievements, all his fame, even if he was a flesh and blood person, would eventually become a name that would never see the light of day. The world had always been so cruel, even more so for the shadow in the dark. But why would a woman who wasn't a shadow be recorded on this list? Old Ma pondered and said, could it be that Song Hui is actually a shadow, but her identity is too important, so she needs to hide it? As soon as he finished speaking, he began to shake his head, probably feeling that his words didn't make sense. Next to him, Lu Chen also shook his head and said, that's impossible. The shadow list is the most secretive thing. Those who can be written on it are real people. There's no need to fake it. Old Ma sighed, nodded, and remained silent. Lu Chen frowned and thought for a while. Suddenly, he asked, how does it record Song Hui's identity and how she died? When she was alive, she was a tax collector in the Dazeyuan. On weekdays, she would be sent to some local industries to collect taxes. There are hundreds and thousands of tax collectors in the Dazeyuan. They are the most ordinary people. As he said this, Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said, as for how she died, it's very simple. She was robbed by the devil cult's demons on the way to collect taxes. She couldn't defeat them and was taken away. In the end, she was tortured to death. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he asked, what about her family? Are they still alive? Old Ma shook his head and said, they're all gone. Song Hui's parents had passed away before she was killed. She was also alone with no relatives. Lu Chen's expression suddenly changed. Old Ma immediately felt it and frowned, what's wrong? Lu Chen closed his eyes, and the muscles on his face twitched slightly. He seemed to be in pain. Perhaps he was forced to recall those unpleasant memories again, which made him feel depressed and uncomfortable. After a while, he whispered, there's something wrong. For some reason, Old Ma suddenly became nervous and asked, what is it? Lu Chen took a deep breath and said, recently, I've been thinking about that incident. What left the deepest impression is not her name, but I remember that when a devil cult's demon was beating her, he seemed to know her a little. He laughed wildly and shouted that he would catch her sister in the future, and the two of them would be together. At that time, Song Hui was in a daze and was on the verge of death. When she heard this, she suddenly seemed to have regained her consciousness. She screamed and fought with the demon, but of course, she couldn't beat him and was killed in the end. Old Ma was stunned and couldn't speak for a while. Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma and said indifferently, Song Hui does have a younger sister. She purposely made a mistake in the list. The two stood in front of the Kunlun Hall and looked in the direction of the Fuyunji Hall in front of them with different expressions. For a long time, they didn't speak. This matter can't be investigated from Fuyunji anymore. After a long time, Lu Chen finally spoke. He looked at the solemn and majestic Fuyunji Hall in the distance and said to Old Ma. Old Ma stood beside him with a complicated expression. After a moment of hesitation, he said in a low voice, why don't we stop the investigation? I feel that there's something strange about this matter. Don't make a big mess. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and said, we still have to investigate. It's fine if I don't remember or care about it in the past, but now that I think about it, I always feel that I owe that woman a little. If I give up now, I won't feel at ease. Just treat it as helping me pay off my debt. Old Ma sighed and said, okay, but we can't investigate Fuyunji anymore. What are you going to do? Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, we can only go to the Dazayuan. Don't alarm anyone. Just find some old people who have been in the Dazayuan for more than 10 or 20 years and ask around to see if anyone still remembers Song Hui. He paused for a moment. After a moment, his eyes suddenly flashed and he said, in addition, we have to ask about her sister. I have a feeling that Song Hui's erased sister may be the key to this mess. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.